Good afternoon, Notre Dame fans, and welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. I am Vince D'Addario, and I am here with my good friend Brian Driscoll. He is also the publisher at irishbreakdown.com, and we are kind of, kicking off kind of our summer schedule, and Mondays, I believe, are generally going to be kind of a recruiting day, right? Isn't that
for the next couple weeks, because we have visits coming up and those kind of things.
So and we've talked about it. June is crazy. June is ultra important to what this team is doing this year, recruiting-wise, and so, most of the major visits are coming on the weekend, and so Monday seems like a great day to kind of wrap things up.
Most of them have now happened. I mean, there's some important kids coming on campus next weekend, but really, I mean, the big chunk of guys that Notre Dame needs to get in this class. I mean, there's a couple more. Obviously, Gavin Sawchuk will be on campus next weekend. C.J. Williams is a big one. He'll be on campus next weekend. Xavier Bradshaw, Zach Rice, but it's a small number. This was the second sort of big weekend that Notre Dame had, and there wasn't as many high end like just gap closer type of guys this weekend, but there was at least one. There's two, in my opinion, that really could be needle movers for this class in a big way. And then, of course, as players, they're gap closers. And I thought Notre Dame had three total players like that. I think two that they really knocked out of the park, a third that didn't didn't necessarily move the needle much, but just really an important weekend in a lot of different ways. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Well,
there's still a few kids that we're trying to get some more detail on. So, we're not going to. There's a couple kids. We'll just kind of give some overview. I've been able to gather a little bit of intel about where things stand with them, but not a ton. But we're going to continue to try to get more and more and more. But we got info. We got some good info on the big ones.
Good. So, Brian, let's jump right in.
We don't have much on Xavier Nwankpa, Nick Singleton, or Cyrus Moss, but other than that, we're loaded and ready to go. Just kidding.
Those guys aren't needle movers.
We have intel on those guys. I just needed a good laugh.
Well, you said it. So you want to jump right in? You want to throw that list up, Brian? We can talk about the guys that were on campus this weekend. And obviously a bunch of offensive guys, not as big a number on defensive guys, but a lot of committed guys too, which is great. I love when the committed guys are coming to visit because they are like extra recruiters for the most part. So I love that.
And when you think about the defense, Vince, I mean, they've already got 8 players committed on defense.
Right.
So it's like there's just not a lot of defensive players left on the board.
Yeah.
Most of them are visited. And the guy that I left out that'll be on campus next weekend on defense is KJ Winston, who's another one. But for the most part now, after this weekend, you've had most of your top uncommitted defensive players, with the exception of, really a couple guys have now been on campus.
Right.
So, I mean, it's, the numbers are small, and I think that's a good thing because there was a picture of, I think it was Xavier Nwankpa that I saw, where it was like him and like 6 Notre Dame people around him, and it's just like
no surprise there.
That's the advantage of having these smaller groups. On defense is they're going to certainly get a lot of individual attention.
Well, you mentioned the quote unquote big 3 that were on campus that are uncommitted, and that everybody kind of wants to hear about. So let's jump right in. You mentioned it, Xavier Nwankpa, fresh off of his Ohio State visit, I do believe. So coming to Notre Dame, Ohio State was in the driver's seat, but Notre Dame has a chance here to make an impression. What have you heard about safety Xavier Nwankpa?
Well, not only did I hear, we knew that Ohio State's been the leader, right? We've talked about this on this show. We've said that, look, the big key about that weekend, that because he went to Ohio State the first weekend of June, right?
Right.
And Notre Dame did not have visits that weekend with 2022 kids. That was a big 2023 weekend with Irish invasion and things like that. There weren't that many 2022 kids, and none that were on for official visits. Part of the reason is you can't have kids on official visits for camps. Like, you can't bring them on campus and work them out during an official visit. That's why you never have kids that are on campus for official visits for Irish invasion. A lot of times, they wouldn't work out. But anyway, that's a different story for a different day. But what I found out this weekend is this is something that was told to several people this weekend that I was able to gather is Xavier actually was really close to committing Ohio State that first weekend.
Really?
Like, really close. And the family just decided, you know what, we still want to go on our visit, so let's check our visits out. So we went to Texas A&M the next weekend, and it came to Notre Dame this weekend with Ohio State being in the clear pole position. And from what I've been able to gather from talking to multiple sources, and this is what's important, I'm getting the same story from multiple people. And that is so important because if you call just, sources at Notre Dame, you're going to get, their impression, which is important, right? I mean, what they think and how they think about it. Because, there's kids that visited last weekend that talking to Notre Dame sources, it's like, I didn't think it went really well with a certain kid. And we talked about it, right? So to me, with Xavier Nwankpa, that was a big one. So I'm hearing a lot of good things coming out of that about that visit. Number one is Notre Dame was able to did a phenomenal job of separating what makes this situation different than Ohio State.
Sure.
Not so much Ohio State specifically, but one thing that Notre Dame has been doing a great job of with, and it really resonated with Xavier and his family, was we're not like anybody else. And they're selling the fact that we are different, and that different makes us better. The fact that you're going to come here and we're going to talk about the academic aspect, which is something that I'm told is really important to him and his family. Just life after football is important to them.
Sure.
Notre Dame obviously sold that, and that's something that Ohio State does a great job of selling. Ohio State doesn't have what Notre Dame has to offer, but they sell what they have to offer really well. Those real life Wednesdays and stuff. Did a great job with that. He spent a lot of time with current players. And one guy that he spent a lot of time with, from what I'm told, is Kyle Hamilton.
Good.
And from what I'm also told is Kyle is a great host because Kyle is real. Kyle doesn't spin Notre Dame. He doesn't, hype it up to where you're being fed a line.
Sure.
Kyle is, hey, here's what I love about it. Here's some of the difficult parts about it. This is the tough parts about it. And recruits relate to that really well because they want to know that, hey, man, tell me, I know everything's not perfect, so what is it that you like about it? And apparently they connected really well. Notre Dame, the final piece is Notre Dame did a phenomenal job, from what I'm told from multiple people, of showing how his fit in this defense is so unique compared to some other places. From what I'm told from some folks on the Ohio State side of things, Ohio State wants Xavier big time, but they're going to bring in, possibly 3 safeties in his class, and his role is going to be kind of a little bit more narrowly defined.
Sure.
Where Notre Dame is kind of saying, here's your role, watch 14.
Right.
And what that means is not you're going to be the next Kyle Hamilton, but, on one snap, Kyle Hamilton's playing free safety. The next snap, he's playing alley to the field. The next snap, he's playing alley to the boundary. The next snap, he's in the box defending the run. The next snap, he's blitzing. And the next snap, he's in man coverage. And so that diversity is so important because when you look to the NFL, for a safety to get drafted high, he can't just be a zone guy or a box guy. He's got to be an all-around player because safety has been somewhat devalued a little bit in the NFL from a draft standpoint. You just don't see safeties getting drafted super high as much anymore. And so to have a guy like Kyle Hamilton, the reason he's being projected by some to be a top 5 pick next year is because he can do it all. But he can only do it all on film because the Notre Dame staff is going to put him in position to do that. And from what I'm told, he's going to be used just as much, if not in more different ways, under Marcus Freeman than even what he was under Coach Lee, who did a great job last year using Kyle Hamilton effectively. And so that was a really big selling point is, Xavier, here's your film, right? Let's watch your film and show what you can do. And then let's watch some of our film and see how you fit.
Sure.
And we talked about this last Wednesday. One snap, Xavier Nwankpa's coming down in the alley playing the run. The next snap, he's playing center field. The next snap, he's in coverage. And that fit really resonated. And also from what I'm told, too, is he really connected with some of the recruits and the commits that were on campus. And that's an important piece to this. I'm told that he really bonded well with especially the defensive guys that were on campus this weekend. So that's another plus, is making him feel like, hey, man, this is family. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like your family.
Absolutely.
So he came out of that visit realizing, number one, that Notre Dame, I am the guy at Notre Dame, like at safety. Like I'm the guy.
I'm not a group of safeties. That's
right. He is the guy.
And you talk about watching film. I would imagine that they showed how they got Kyle Hamilton involved as a freshman. Even though he wasn't the starter, he was involved as a freshman.
I didn't hear anything like that specifically. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I just didn't hear that. Sure. It was more about looking at Xavier's film and saying, look, let's look at what you do. These are the areas where your game really thrives. Here's some areas where we think we can make you even better, but then also popping on the film and saying, here's how we're going to use you. Gotcha. And it's not just Kyle too. I mean, Sean Crawford played all over the field last year too. You know, he was in man coverage one snap, playing cover 2 the next, playing cover 4 the next, playing center field the next. And I think that from what I'm told, that really resonated with Xavier. But the final takeaway for me, the thing that I think really moved the needle is the relationships with the commits and the current players.
Yeah, that
was big for him.
That's huge.
And Xavier's a really intelligent kid, a really thoughtful kid. He's very much, from what I'm told, a big picture kid, you know, where it's not just earliest playing time, NFL. That's a part of it. Of course, if you're a top recruit, that should be part of your deal. But he's also a kid that understands I got to go somewhere I'm going to be comfortable, where I'm desired, I'm appreciated, and all those kind of things. And so what I was told is Notre Dame knew they had a lot of ground to make up coming into the visit. What I'm told coming out of the visit is that they feel really good about their chance to take the next step and close. Like they feel like they've erased that gap with Ohio State. Now, that doesn't mean that Ohio State's not going to be on the phone with Xavier today trying to get that back, right? That's going to be the key. And we saw this last week with Dallin Hayden. Dallin Hayden came into the visit loving Ohio State, and then he went to Notre Dame. Notre Dame did a great job, but then within a week, it looks like it's a done deal in the other direction.
Yeah, right.
The good news for Notre Dame is he's not going back to Ohio State this weekend. And so they feel like they're in a position to really take that next step and make this one really a battle to get Xavier Nwankpa. And it's not unnoticed what Notre Dame has done in front of him as well.
Before we move on to the next guy, Brian, we got a super chat in here. Got to throw it up. Scott Fessler, thank you, sir. We really appreciate it. These are the fun shows to do when we're talking recruiting, and we know that you guys enjoy it too. So thank you for the support. We really appreciate it big time.
Yeah. And I would say this, that with Xavier, I felt like this one was going to be a tough pull for a while. I didn't know if this one, if Notre Dame was going to be able to make up the ground on Xavier. I'm way more confident that Notre Dame actually has a legitimate shot to not only be in this one, but to get this one. And again, it's going to take work. This is just getting started.
Sure.
But, they had the whole defensive staff was all over. I mean, Chris O'Leary did a great job from what I'm told. Marcus Freeman did a great job. Mike Mickens was on them. I don't know how it could have gone better for Notre Dame. Like, I don't know if they could, looking back at it, I don't know if they could have done a better job. And here's something else. And if you read the article that I wrote today at irishbreakdown.com on Carson Hinzman, an offensive lineman, okay, right? The most not worried about the flash and all that, an offensive lineman brought up to me without being prompted about the NIL stuff, the name, image, likeness stuff, about how well Notre Dame is selling that and showing how the Notre Dame brand is big time.
Yeah.
And if they're doing that with a center,
right.
Imagine the impact it's going to have with guys like Xavier Nwankpa, but guys that are more. And what I mean by that is certain players are on an island. You see them; they're more noticeable.
Sure, absolutely.
Other guys are not. Linemen especially are not. And so that, from what I'm told, and I've been told this from player after player, dad after dad, like Notre Dame is doing such a great job of talking about how when this legislation goes down or the NCAA finally steps up and makes the rule, here's how being at Notre Dame is going to benefit you. And that's what we talked about from the beginning, Vince, is this is something that for Notre Dame could be a game changer.
Yes.
And led by Mike Elston, who I'm told is the guy that's been leading sort of this push and really educating kids on this. This has been huge for Notre Dame, and it was very important when it came to some of these guys like Xavier Nwankpa and players like that. And again, it's not a needle mover. It's not like make money. It's not that. It's all part of the whole package that Notre Dame is selling.
Right. This is what stands out. And Notre Dame had, and not to get too off track here, but Notre Dame had that brand already. And using
what they're telling people. It's like, look, we've got the brand. Now we can monetize it.
Yes, exactly.
You can now monetize it.
And not just ignoring that this is going on is huge. You're right. It's a potential game changer if they do it right. And it sounds like they're headed down the right path. So that's really good news to hear. Okay, next guy, one of the big three, I guess we can call it, but Nicholas Singleton, running back. You talked about Dallin Hayden.
He's part of the other big three. the original big three that we've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Dallin Hayden looks like he might be headed, to Ohio State based on some of the stuff I've seen on social media.
Penn State.
Sorry, Penn State. Excuse me.
You're thinking of Dallin Hayden, yeah.
Well, that's why I said Dallin Hayden. He's headed.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said Nicholas Singleton. My apologies.
So that's why this is hugely important. Having Nicholas Singleton on campus this week. How did his visit go?
Well, so he was another guy that coming into the visit, Notre Dame was trailing other people.
Right.
Notre Dame was trailing Penn State. Alabama had been making moves on him, but they've kind of backed off a little bit just because they, like I said, they got some other backs in the class and things like that. And so coming into it, this was a big weekend. And the interesting thing with Nicholas Singleton is he was a guy that Notre Dame had a really good shot with and probably led for before the pandemic hit. I mean, Notre Dame was considered his top program. Yeah, he's been on camp. This is not Nicholas Singleton's first visit to the Notre Dame campus.
Right.
Yeah, he has been on campus before. Notre Dame was in great position. But I'm sorry, I'm taking this down because I just saw that I had a little spelling error there. We're going to switch this, get back there. I'm going to correct that. See, I'm multitasking, Vince. I'm fixing mistakes while also breaking things down. So Nicholas Singleton was a guy that I thought Notre Dame was in a great position with early. And then, of course, the pandemic hits and things change. And Penn State has done a phenomenal job with him of getting back to really making it seem like, hey, this is, stay in state. This is the place to be, stay in state. And, selling the whole running back U thing, which Penn State is looking at with like Miles Sanders and Saquon Barkley recently. But then, of course, back in the 80s, in early 90s, Penn State was considered kind of RBU. It was Kajana Carter. All the way back.
Sure.
It just Curtis Enos. And then even before then, Blair Thomas and guys like that. So anyway, Penn State had done a great job with Nicholas Singleton, was his clear leader. I looked at it coming into the weekend from my sources. Notre Dame, as far as odds, best chances to get a running back, it was Hayden. I think we were asked this on Friday, weren't we, Vince? It was Hayden, Sawchuk, and Singleton.
Right. That
was the order of best, most likely. And coming out of the visit, you saw last night, I believe it was Tom Loy and Steve Voltfong at 247 Sports put in crystal balls. I was a little skeptical of that because I hadn't heard a ton about it. So I reached out to a couple people last night, talked to a couple people, close to the situation this morning, and it sounds like that is where it's headed.
Wow.
That not only are they leading, but he was really close to actually committing this weekend. But Notre Dame, in typical Notre Dame fashion, said, no, take your visits, make sure, right? Don't make an emotional decision, make sure. But absolutely knocked it out of the park. And one of the things that I'm hearing is obviously his relationship with Lance Taylor is a big part of why he showed up this weekend and why Notre Dame is in a good place. But what I heard from him, and I'll say this again when we talk a little bit about Carson Hinzman, is Tommy Rees is really impressing kids and parents when they're on campus. So he did a really good job of showing how he fits into the system, right? And they talked about, look, this is the kind of back you can be. Look what we did with Kyron Williams. Look what you did with Josh Adams. It's kind of funny that people are like, you don't associate Notre Dame with great running back success because we haven't seen the high draft picks. But, Josh Adams is a Heisman candidate in November of 2017. Right. In 2018, Dexter Williams misses the first 4 games, still almost goes for 1,000 yards. He's a key part of Notre Dame going undefeated that season. And then this past season, obviously, Kyron Williams is a second-team All-American. And so that on-field success is really starting to have a big impact with recruits. They've already got Jadarian Price and obviously Nicholas Singleton and other parts of the Big Three. So the football part of it was really important, showing Nicholas how he fit. But then, again, one of the things I was told this morning was what really resonated with him and his parents was just the whole big picture part of the program, the health of the program, the fact that, Notre Dame is trending up where maybe some other programs have had 2 or 3 down years in the last 3 years.
You can't really compare Notre Dame to Penn State, from a recency bias situation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and the thing is Penn State 2 years ago won the Cotton Bowl against Memphis, and they won 11 games. But if you look at it, Penn State 2 of the last 3 years has been down.
Right.
They went 11-2 in 2019, but they went 9-4 the year before that and finished ranked 17th. And then this past season, they went 4-5. So, they're doing well, but they're not crushing it like Notre Dame is crushing it. And I think that's something that Notre Dame has done a really good job on. I think the fact that, you've seen a lot of staff turnover at Penn State in recent years is something to kind of keep an eye on, like, well, why is all that happening? They've completely turned their offensive staff over twice each of the last 2 years, just completely overhauled it.
Wow.
That's not the signs of a healthy program.
Right.
Where Chip Long leaves and Notre Dame just kind of ascends everybody, you know what I mean? And so that was something part of this picture too with Singleton was Notre Dame just selling the overall picture of it. And again, if you know Nicholas Singleton at all, you know that, the offense is going to be important, the style, fitting, getting touches and all that. But he's also another one of those kids like Xavier Nwankpa that understands there's more to this thing. And from what I'm told about his parents, they understand there's a little bit more to this thing than just how do you fit into this system, X's and O's, Y's. And that's what Notre Dame has just did a great job. That to me, from what I'm told from sources, that is the thing that really moved the needle with him even more than the football piece was that aspect of just the holistic aspects of it. So they absolutely crushed it.
Yeah,
and
that's
so
awesome.
Tom and Steve with their crystal balls, I went from a little skeptical just because I had only gotten like one little piece of information about Nicholas prior to that. And then, obviously that kind of sent me into overdrive of, okay, let's really dig in. And the next three people I talked to were all like, oh yeah, there's a great deal of confidence in Notre Dame that they absolutely crushed this one.
So let me ask you this, Brian. We were talking about Xavier Nwankpa. He was one of those ones that you were saying if he commits in the summertime, you like where Notre Dame's at, but if he waits for the fall, you don't. Was he one of those?
No, I actually thought the longer with Xavier it went, the better it was going to be for Notre Dame.
Okay, gotcha.
So and then with Nicholas Singleton, he was a guy that was likely going to make a decision this summer.
Okay.
So that it was for him. It was just about the only way Notre Dame was going to have a chance against Nicholas Singleton was by hitting an absolute, just hitting an absolute grand slam this weekend. It was the only chance you're going to have because from what I was told for the last month, Penn State was way ahead. And Notre Dame has completely erased that gap. And this is why we said, look, I want to remind people of something. This is why we have said these visits are so important because what you have done is you've been able to get Nicholas Singleton back to where he was before the pandemic.
Right.
Which was pro Notre Dame.
Right.
And being close to Penn State, and that is the local school, and they were able to really sell that part up, and over a year went by, and he couldn't make it back to Notre Dame. Now you're able to get him on campus officially, and it's like, oh, yeah, that's why Notre Dame was my leader for so long.
Sure. Well, Brian, I want to ask because, it sounds like Notre Dame's in a good place with Singleton, but on the field, how does he rank for you on the field? You know what I mean? It's great that he's, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. So there were four backs to me that were better than everybody else in the class.
Okay.
And it was Dallin Hayden was my number one. Nicholas Singleton was my number two. This is on current grade. Singleton was my number two. Gavin Sawchuk was my number three. And there's distance between the first two and the third guy.
Okay.
And then right behind Gavin Sawchuk from a current grade standpoint is Jadarian Price. Okay. And then I have my upside grade. And as I've said before, of those four backs, I believe that, and I'm going to look this up now to confirm, but I believe Nicholas Singleton is the only one that I gave a 5-star upside grade to.
Okay.
I believe that to be true. Let me just pull this up just so I can confirm. I don't want to give up bad information, but I got my offer list here. So I'm going to pull this up. I know that I did not give a 5-star upside. I did not give a 5-star upside grade to Gavin Sawchuk. I just looked that up. I did not give a 5-star upside grade to Dallin Hayden either. So yes, I am correct that the only guy I gave a 5-star upside grade was Nicholas Singleton. Because here's the thing that I had said with Nicholas, there's things that we don't know that that he's going to do because of the offense he plays in. Right? Sure. It's an outside zone option offense. Right? He catches a lot of pitches. There's not a lot of like inside zones, counters, powers, and some of those things. So he's going to show up needing a little bit of work on some of those things. Now, I think he's got instincts and those types of things. But the 5-star upside comes from he's got great size. He's listed between 5'11" and 6 foot. He's listed at over 200 pounds. He's got home run speed. I've compared him to Josh Adams in the past because, remember how Josh was Josh, if Josh got like this big of a crease, it was gone. And strike up the band. I mean, you weren't catching them. Nicholas has that, but Nicholas has better feet in the backfield than Josh had.
That's so important because there were many times where there were opportunities for Josh Adams to get yards, but it was straight ahead.
He'd have to make somebody miss.
Sure.
He could run through people, but he wasn't a guy that was going to. I think of the long run that Kyron had against Florida State. Remember when Janarius Robinson's just comes screaming off the edge and Kyron just gives him a quick back cut, makes a miss, and takes off for a big run.
Right.
Josh was a great back, but Josh wasn't doing that. Josh was also a guy that could go from 90 every snap, and Kyron's not that kind of back. So it's just they're different backs. The thing I like about Nicholas is a big kid that's got really good vertical speed, but he's got some nimbleness to his game too. Okay. I mean, he's got some really nice feet, and you can see it especially when he plays corner. And I love guys that play both ways. Now, he's not a college DB. He's not. But there are things you can see when he's playing defense. You're like, okay, look at the hips, look at the feet,
hips,
those
the feet. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's why he got the highest upside grade. And so that's why, he's also the epitome of why I do the grades the way that I do them. I mean, he's another example of that, which is, right now, technically he's a little raw. He doesn't run the whole, college offense right now. He doesn't catch the ball a ton in high school. And so his grade, compared to a guy like Dallin Hayden, who does all those things right now, it's just hard for me to say he's a better player right now because of those parts of his game he's learning. But as you also know, when I take my analyst hat on and I put on what I would want as a college coach and a recruiter, I say this a million times: give me the upside guy, give me the ceiling, right? And what I've also said is, if you get any of the big three, it's great, it's a home run. But if you could get one of the top two, that would be even better because, as I said, there's distance between 1 and 2 and then 3.
Sure.
So if they're able to close this one out, that's going to be huge. And now what I'm told is Notre Dame has said, hey, look, take your visits. He's got he's got a Bama visit, and then there's one other visit he was going to take. And I didn't write it down for life. I cannot remember what it was going to be. They said take the visits. It would not shock me if he doesn't take all of his visits.
Yeah. Yeah.
If they keep the momentum they got coming out of the weekend, it would not shock me if he doesn't take all of his visits.
You think he's going to Alabama though? Is that this weekend coming up?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But it might have been a midweek visit. I have to go. I have to go back.
Okay.
I think he's going to Bama this weekend, but I think there's like a midweek visit he was thinking about taking. I'm not 100% sure on that.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I feel like there's a chance he may not even do that. And Bama, I believe, has 2 running backs committed right now. They're still recruiting him, but Notre Dame, I'm not worried about Alabama. Haven't been worried about Alabama. I mean, it was Penn State. It was either Penn State or Ohio State. Then Ohio State bowed out because of where they stood with some other kids. And then, honestly, Nicholas did some things that made it clear to Ohio State that they weren't on the same level with him anymore.
Gotcha.
And so sort of like we're clearly trailing some other teams, and so we're going to put our efforts on other players.
Back up. Yeah,
right. But early on in the process, from talking to my sources at Ohio State, their top 2 backs on the board were Hayden and Singleton, same as Notre Dame.
Right.
And so, again, if you can get one of those kids, even though Ohio State bowed out because they knew they weren't going to get them. Right. It wasn't that they bowed out because they didn't like them. They bowed out because they knew they were going to get them.
Right, and you only have so many resources. You have to.
That's smart recruiting by Tony Alford. That's smart recruiting, and then you put all your eggs in the Dallin Hayden basket, and then there's some other running backs thereafter. But Notre Dame stayed on them and kept pushing, because what I was told about Notre Dame is they don't necessarily have a pecking order amongst these running backs. It's sort of like we like all of them,
right?
And we'll take who wants to come. Gotcha. But Singleton's a guy that they have been on for a long time. So kudos to them for not backing out when it was clear that they were fading. Kudos to Lance Taylor and Tommy Reese to say, hey, look, we're fading, but we're not out, baby. We're going to keep coming.
Love that.
And then the visit was the key. And Vince, they absolutely knocked it out of the park with that visit. Cannot say it enough. Can't say it enough.
Now, when we started this thing, you talked about the 3 top guys that were on campus this week, and you said 2 were really good. 1 wasn't really a needle mover. Yeah. We've got 1 more to talk about, so that makes me a little nervous about what you're about to say.
Yeah.
But we do have to talk about Cyrus Moss, defensive end out west, right? And so process of elimination, you're telling me that the needle wasn't moved very much from his
Yeah. Look, Notre Dame did a good job with him. There was nothing that went wrong. Mm-hmm. It's just the feeling is that they weren't able to close. Like he was a little bit more unmovable.
Less
you know
open
what I'm saying?
to
being moved.
To the pitch.
Correct.
Yeah, right.
The first two guys, we talked about how those guys were leaning other places when they came into the visit. So
sure.
Cyrus Moss is Oregon, Clemson, Florida. I think that there's nothing that I've been able to gather, and I've talked to 2 or 3 different sources about this so far. He liked it. It was fine. He seemed, he's friendly, but there just wasn't a lot of optimism that they really connected with him.
Okay.
And he's a bit of a not shy, but just sort of a doesn't let people in kind of kid, a little bit kind of keep you at arm's length. And that was still happening during the visit. Normally kids like that, when they get on the visit, they'll kind of open up, loosen up a little bit. And that wasn't necessarily the case with Cyrus. Now, they're still pushing. They're still going to keep recruiting him. They still want him, all that stuff. Nothing like that's changed. He's still going to consider them. He hasn't dropped anything like that. It's just it's kind of like the Jake Taylor situation.
Right.
Some kids you're going to be able to move the needle with, like they did with Xavier, like they did with Nicholas Singleton. With Cyrus, it's just there's still clearly going to be some work to do. Now, here's the good news the good news that I was told is he is not even remotely close to decision-making mode. He's going to carry this into the fall.
Okay.
So if you're Notre Dame, that's good. That's one that you want to last.
Yeah, yes. Right.
So they're going to still try to get him back on campus for a game. I think that's where you could maybe move a Cyrus Moss, is get him back in town for like maybe the USC game or something like that, or the North Carolina game. And that's where you can move it. So they're still in the game with Cyrus Moss, but they didn't really make up any ground from what I'm told this weekend. It wasn't Now, again, they put all the same pitches and everything. It just with him, it was sort of I just think there's a little bit more skepticism. And here's part of it. Part of it is the fact that there's 3 really good defensive ends already in the class.
Sure.
And I think for Cyrus, you look at that and you say, boy, that's where Xavier Nwankpa, it's like, we don't even have a safety in the class. Like, you're it.
Yeah.
Like you're our guy. There's nobody else. I mean, you're our dude.
Defensive end, yeah.
I mean, you got Tyson Ford, Aiden Gabere's blowing up. They went out and got Darren Agu. I mean, they're doing pretty good at defensive end. And now you've got the pitch of, look, we had 4 defensive ends that we signed in 2016, and they're all 4 went and got drafted. But there's just a lot more work to do. And Mike Elson and Marcus Freeman have both done a great job of really pitching Notre Dame to Cyrus, but it's going to take a while, and it's going to be hard to do. It's going to be harder to do with him than maybe some other guys.
All right, so let's work our way through some of these other guys. Carson Hinzman, you mentioned him earlier, talking about the name, image, and likeness, things of that nature. So he was on campus. How did things go for him?
So I had a chance to speak with Carson for a while last night, and kudos to Carson because he lives about 7 hours away in Wisconsin. They drove on this visit. So
really?
Yeah, they drove because he wanted his mom and dad and 2 sisters to be on the campus with him, right?
Gotcha.
If that says anything about it, right?
And they can only pay for so many plane tickets, et cetera.
Correct,
right?
correct. Yeah. So it was just cheaper for them to hop in a car and drive. And his dad likes to drive. I mean, he drove him to Columbus. He's going to Iowa this weekend. His dad likes to drive, man.
I hate driving, man.
His dad's a really good guy. But so I had a chance to talk with him last night, and he's the one that brought up to me the name, image, likeness thing. I just was like, I asked him. I said, here's the question I asked Carson that led to that answer. I said, look, every school is great, and this isn't a one's better than the other. What I'm asking you about, and I want to make sure I make those prefaces because I don't want to make it look like what does Notre Dame do better than everybody else? It was just what's the one thing that was unique, that was different about the Notre Dame visit compared to others. So I'm trying to ask that in as a non-pushing Notre Dame kind of way. You got to be careful with those kind of things.
Open-ended, yeah, right.
Right. And just, what's something that's different? Every school is going to stand out in different ways. What was the one thing that Notre Dame did differently? And he started talking about some different things. And then he was like, oh, and it's just kind of like it clicked. Like, oh, yeah. And like he goes, and he said this, he goes, it's not really important to me, again, because he's an offensive lineman. He said, but then he started talking about the branding thing and the stuff they were doing. He was like, it was a really cool presentation. So even though it's not going to be like a needle mover for him, it impacted him.
Right.
So imagine what it's going to do for kids who it is a needle mover for. Right. And that's the thing that I say. And I have literally just about every recruit that I've spoken with or every parent that I've spoken with, that's been something that's been brought up to me. is they're doing a great job with this NIL stuff. Like the presentation is great, and to show how the Notre Dame brand carries so much weight and how it's not about who won the most recent national title, right? That's not what branding is. It's not who's the hot program now. Clemson is clearly a better program right now than Notre Dame, but that has nothing to do with branding, okay?
Right.
It's just the reality. But anyway, they did a great job there. He hung out with he mentioned like 6. I mean, it was Jarrett Patterson, Tosh Baker, Josh Lugg, Blake Fisher, Rocco Spindler. He mentioned, he's very familiar with some of the players that just graduated. Obviously, Liam Eichenberg being a guy that he's familiar with what he's doing. Notre Dame had an interesting comment to him, which we'll get into when we're done talking about Carson. But they told us, like, look, we view as you being the center of the future and replacing Jarrett when he leaves. So I thought that was interesting.
That's very interesting.
So, and we'll get into that in tomorrow's show because we're going to break down the offensive line tomorrow. So, because I'm hearing a lot of different stuff going on, but I thought that was an interesting thing. But they talked about him being sort of they like him at center. They want him to be the center. He wants to play center. He actually played center at the beginning of his sophomore year before moving to guard because that's where his team needed him, and he plays guard now. So that part of it was obviously really impactful for him. They sat down. He was another kid that brought up. I actually asked him about Jeff Quinn, and it was because he's known Jeff Quinn. I mean, Quinn started recruiting him as a freshman. Quinn's done a great job with Carson Hinzman up to this point in time. Now, can he close? That's a different story.
Sure.
And there's still work to do there. But what the coach that really stood out to him this weekend, he said, was Tommy Rees. And I'm going to read you the quote that he said about Tommy Rees because, I mean, like Carson's he's kind of a typical offensive lineman, Vince, if I could say it any other way, in that he's not a real excitable kid.
Right.
And that's
just a rock. Yeah,
most linemen are that way. It's just like, hey, look, I just want to go play ball. Just give me my helmet. Just give me my, number that no skill player would ever want to wear. And, let me go do my thing. And that's how Carson is. He's just like, let me do my work kind of kid. And I love that about him. I like that in an offensive lineman. But when I started asking him about, the question was more about, what was the message that you got from Coach Quinn and the staff about why they want you? And he just jumped into right immediately started talking about Tommy Rees. And I want to find that comment. He said, because it wasn't just the words, but it was like the energy behind those words.
Sure. The conviction.
He's like, he goes, we had a really, really good conversation with Coach Rees about why they want me. And that's exactly how he said it. You know what I mean? And he said, like, Coach Rees is a really, really great guy. And I made sure I put both of those reallys in there both times because he goes, I really respect him because Coach Rees was very, honest with him. Look, we see you as the center of the future, but you come to Notre Dame, there's competition. It's that you're not going to be like the only top 100 offensive lineman that's at your position, But he really stood out. And I think that, to me, the reason I take that as a takeaway is because he's already got a good relationship with Jeff Quinn, but it's can you add more to the mix that is going to help you beat out homeschool Wisconsin, Iowa, Ohio State, those kind of things. And so that was a big takeaway for me, was just how well he connect, because I don't think he'd ever met Tommy Rees before, because the last time he was on campus, Chip Long was the offensive coordinator. So why would he meet the quarterback's coach on a visit when it was for a game when there was 30 people on campus?
Of course.
So I didn't ask him specifically if that was the first time he'd ever met him in person, but it just seemed the way he was talking to me was like this was the first time. Now they've done Zoom calls together and stuff like that, but like that's a whole different deal. So I was really taken aback by how much he jumped on the whole Tommy Rees angle as far as how that impacted him.
I like that.
He's going to be visiting Iowa this upcoming week, and he had an interesting comment. So it's Wisconsin, Ohio State were his first two visits, then Notre Dame, then Iowa. That's really the four players for him. That's the four schools that are going to be factors for him. Ohio State is concerning because they're a big-time program, and they put a lot of linemen in the NFL as well. Iowa doesn't necessarily concern me as much. I think he likes Iowa a lot, but I feel like if it's going to come down to those four schools, I have a hard time seeing Iowa winning that battle. It's going to be, in my opinion, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Notre Dame is the three in this. Wisconsin has the homeschool effect.
Sure.
I felt Notre Dame was really – I got the impression that Notre Dame, he never said this, was his leader for a while. I think they needed to really knock this visit out of the park to kind of maintain that, because Ohio State and Wisconsin both had great visits. And I think this is something that now it's about closing. Now the next step is, can you close?
Sure.
So that's where it is. But I thought they did a really good job with him.
Okay.
And he definitely felt like a priority, even though there was 3 other offensive linemen on campus. He from what I was told by he didn't say this, but the impression I got from Carson was that he really felt like a priority. And he talked about his chance that he got to meet Coach Kelly in the office, but then they went to Brian Kelly's lake house and he got to, spend some time with Coach Kelly there, and the families were around and all that kind of stuff. So that was another part of it that he had mentioned that's kind of stood out to him. But here's the interesting thing is he wants to make a decision this summer. That's what he said. He said, but if there's not a school that if I know, like if there's a pick, like this school stands out, then I'm going to make a decision. But if I'm struggling, he goes, I may hold off and wait and take some game visits this fall.
Okay.
He said, because, I want to do this. Basically, I want to do this once. I don't want to commit and then have regrets. And so if he sits down after all the visits are over and he weighs the pros and cons and there's one school that he's like, yeah, that's where I want to go, he'll make his decision.
Gotcha.
But there is a chance.
With the head at his shoulders to me.
That's exactly right. This is a smart kid from a good family that's like, hey, look, if just get it over with. And we kind of joked about, he's like, there's some people trying to get me to do a video and he's like, no, I'm just going to put some on social media and go back to work. You know what I mean? It's just like, exactly. He's a lineman, man. He's not going to do some commitment video. At least that's, he's doesn't have the interest in it. But
I love that.
So that's going to be the interesting thing, Vince, is if he doesn't decide this summer, that puts Notre Dame in a really interesting bind, because it's like, look, you need guys, but what if some of these kids hold off? And I think there's going to be some kids, not just with Notre Dame, but in general, that are going to decide to wait to do that.
Okay.
Because the thing he said to me is like, I talked to some other guys, and this is what we're thinking. Because a lot of these kids are like, look, we're really putting all these visits into a short period of time. We haven't been on campuses in a year and a half, and now we're trying to, rush decisions. Not that schools are some schools are rushing these kids to make decisions. Notre Dame is not doing that. But if he does decide to wait till the fall, that puts Notre Dame in a unique mix. Okay, do we keep pushing for him and save a spot, or do we maybe go to some plan B guys? I would think that with him in particular, because he's a center, that Notre Dame would stay in this one until the end.
Gotcha. Because
of the uniqueness of his position. But that would put them in a little bit of a spot to where you say, oh, okay, let's see how this one plays out.
Well, what the one thing that stood out to me, we're talking about a kid with a good head on his shoulders, good family, etc. The fact that he decided to drive 7 hours so that his sisters could go, that says a lot to me, because my son has sisters, and I don't know that
he goes, we drove because we wanted to make sure that my sisters could be part of this.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. That's major, man, because I don't see my son doing that, even though he loves his siblings. I don't see that.
I only have one.
Exactly. So that really tells me how important family is, and that's important, and I think that's really cool.
When it also gives some insight into what are the things that are going to be important to his decision.
What are the priorities? Yes.
It's not, hey, you got him because you literally had him walking into campus on a red carpet, and you showed him. Like I saw some pictures of Oklahoma's recruiting event from this weekend, and it's cars, to me, phony. You've got all these really nice cars in the end zone. And I'm like, if I saw Brian Kelly putting a bunch of expensive cars on the field at Notre Dame, I'd be ticked off.
In the end zone.
Yeah. And it's just like, it's all show. And Notre Dame's thing is, we don't have to do that phony stuff, because what we actually are is what separates us.
Correct.
When you got to do that phony stuff, it tells me that you can't just get kids by Norman, Oklahoma, and all this other kind of stuff. You got to do this flashy stuff, to try to coerce a teenager to come play for you.
But you know what?
If guys like Hinzman aren't going to be, they're not going to care about that. And when a kid brings us
in the end zone is what sways a guy, I don't know that I want that guy.
Well, unless you're Oklahoma and that's what you're looking for, that's kind of program you want to run.
That's what I'm saying. Like the program that I would want to run, that if that's
I thought it was cool when I was a teenager. I'm not going to lie to you, but at the end of the day, it's not the reason I'm going to. Unless one of those cars is going to be mine, it's not going to sway my decision.
That's a whole other conversation, by the way.
No comment.
Yeah,
but no, I was nervous about. So I'd been hearing coming into the visit. I've been hearing that that Wisconsin and Ohio State have really been making a hard push with Hinzman. I was getting a little bit nervous.
Sure.
But and those teams are still going to be a big part of this decision, but I feel like Notre Dame was able to kind of regain any potential lost crown with how things went this weekend with Carson Hinzman.
So real quick before we move on to the next guy, where does Carson Hinzman rank for you as far as, on the board, et cetera?
I mean, he's the only center on the board, the only pure center on the board. And when I mean pure center, I mean not that he plays it, but he's got the body you want. He's athletic. He's got great hands. And we've talked about this, Vince. Two things that a center has to be. He has to be really quick, and he has to have strong hands, because a lot of times centers, as they're snapping, they have to be blocking with their offhand.
Absolutely. Yep.
And then the snap hand comes back. So if you don't have strong hands, you're not going to be a good center.
Yep, agreed.
And Carson is not a big guy. He's 275. He's like a country boy. He's not fat at all. He's just kind of a good sized kid. He's going to get weight on. He's going to be 295, when it's all said and done, maybe 300. But he's got real strong, powerful hands. He is to me in that group of those group of guys where I said, look, we did what's the dream class for Notre Dame look like? And I said, look, there's 3 kids from Wisconsin that are going to be on campus that are on the list. It's Carson, Billy Schrouth, and Joe Bruner. To me, you got to get 2 of those guys. And that's just where it is. And Carson is one of the 2. Like him and Schrouth if I can only have 2, those are the 2 I'd pick. With all due respect to Joe Bruner, those are the 2 I'd pick. And part of the reason for Carson is because he does project so well to center.
Okay.
That is a big king thing for me. And I think he'd be a great fit. He brings leadership. I think he brings the athleticism, the toughness, and he's a highly ranked kid too. Rivals ranks him as the number 88 player in the entire country.
Wow.
It's not often you see a center ranked that high.
Yeah, no kidding. Because they're limited, is not limited, but you know what I mean.
You just don't see guards and centers, period, ranked that high, especially undersized. And technically right now he is undersized for what Notre Dame is. Sure. He's 275, 280. Yeah. So for him to be ranked that high just says a lot about, it would be huge for the class too. I mean, just not just from you're adding a really good player, and he is a really good player, but you're also adding a highly ranked guy, which is another thing.
Sure.
Look, we can deny it if you want, but the fact is other players look at that stuff. I don't care about rankings. You don't care about rankings. I don't think a lot of the people listening to our show don't care about rankings, but other kids do. A running back is going to look and say Joey Chan or Joey Chan. I just kind of combine the 2 commits into one. Joey Tanona, Ty Chan, both highly ranked guys, top 200 guys. Now you get Carson Hinzman, highly ranked guys. If you're able to close out with Billy Schrouth, another highly ranked guy. If you're a running back or a quarterback, that's exactly what you want to play behind.
Yes, 100%.
And that's the key. Now, it doesn't mean like a kid like Ashton Craig, who's from Indiana, is a kid I like, is a 3-star kid. If his body is, if Matt Bayless signs off on his body being one that can get to 300 pounds, I love that kid like that. But kid like that isn't going to make a Nicholas Singleton say, man, I want to run behind that guy.
Right.
Sure. Carson Hinzman, Joey Tanona, Ty Chan, Billy Schrouth, Joe Bruner. Those are guys that your running back is going to look behind and say, hey, I want to run behind those guys.
Let's go.
You know, right. And so, I mean, it's important. It's not important to what kind of player he's going to be. It doesn't matter at all. But it's important when it comes to building the whole class and being able to use it. Say, look what we just signed on the offensive line. A year after getting Blake Fisher and Rocco Spindler, there's ways you can spin this if you're Notre Dame, if you're able to finish with a couple of these kids. Now, the concern is if they're not able to finish with those kids, because right now Notre Dame's in the top 2 or 3 with a lot of really good offensive linemen. But I'm not as confident now as I was a month ago that they were definitely going to get a couple of these guys. And so this weekend's visit was an important part of that.
Earlier, when we were talking about Xavier Nwankpa, the safety, there's no safeties in the class right now. And so there was another young man on campus who's projected as a secondary player, cornerback, safety, Jaden Bellamy. Still no safeties in the class yet. So how did Jaden's visit go?
So he's one of the kids that I'm still trying to get more on how it specifically went with him. Other than all I've gotten so far is it went well. The typical stuff, right? Like I could literally write a commit story for every kid that visited without actually interviewing anyone, because it's always the same thing. It was great. It was beautiful. I enjoyed meeting the players. I really liked my time with the coaches. Notre Dame does a great job selling the whole package, right? Like
Right.
I can't really write that story for every kid without talking to him.
Right.
All I've really got from him, from his visit, is that part of it, as far as specifically how it went, beyond just like, yeah, we think we did a nice job. I think Penn State is still the team to beat with him.
Okay.
But here's the other thing here's the interesting part with the Jaden Bellamy visit. They are recruiting him as a corner, even though he plays safety.
Okay.
But with where they stand with a couple other corners in the class, Benjamin Morrison and Devin Moore, there's a reason he still came on the visit, and they canceled the visit for Nakai Martinez.
Right.
Because Nakai is a corner. That is it.
Right. But Jaden Bellamy is versatile enough that he could be a safety.
Correct.
If needed.
Correct.
Yeah.
Jaden could play corner. He could play nickel. He could play safety.
Yep.
And that's why he's still on the board. And the other thing, too, is he can run. Jaden can run. I mean, he's kind of a raw player, in my opinion, Vince. And as a source, I talked to a source and I said, here's how I see him. You tell me if you agree with this. I said, he's a safety trapped in a cornerback's body. Right. That's what I see him. I was like, yep, that's pretty accurate. Right. But their thinking is he's so fast that they can, he's going to need time to learn how to play corner if he plays corner.
Sure.
But he's so fast and physical that you're willing to take that chance. Sure. But if it doesn't work out, he's a safety in high school. You know what I mean? Right. It's the corner part is more about the speed and just the body. He's got more of a cornerback body. But the fact that he could play so many positions is why Notre Dame likes him. So I was curious if he was even still going to be a guy they would take right now because of how great things are looking for Benjamin Morrison and Devin Moore. And I was told, yeah, he's a guy that we would, if he wanted to commit to us, we would, this is the message I was given from sources. If he wanted to commit to Notre Dame, that he'd be a guy that they would take. So I thought that was interesting because I wasn't sure. That was something I was a little bit unsure of. And so now that doesn't mean that they're going to get a commitment from him because, like I said, Penn State has done a really good job with him. Penn State does a great job in the state of New Jersey in general. And so, I think that's interesting. There's a lot of work to be done there, but it does sound like Notre Dame did a good job with him. Obviously, he was on campus with his teammate, Steve Angeli, so who's a Notre Dame commit. So that's something that's working in Notre Dame's favor.
Sure, of course.
And Penn State just got beat for a teammate of his in the secondary, Jaden Gould. A lot of people thought Jaden Gould was a lock to Penn State for a while. USC just got him. He committed to USC on Saturday.
Big difference.
So, So that's the one thing that you looked at and said, if Penn State gets Jaden Gould, that's only going to help them when it comes to Jaden Bellamy. But USC got Jaden Gould. So if you're Penn State, you're like, okay, Notre Dame got Angeli. Penn State got, Jaden Gould. That was one of the things working in our favor was sort of that aspect of it. So I feel like Notre Dame has definitely made up ground from what I was told about that. And and then the rest of the visits, Vince, honestly, the offensive linemen don't have a ton on Joe Bruner and Emil Wagner other than typical did well. They really enjoyed it, connected with the staff really well. The one thing I did get out of this is one of the things I feel like I can confidently say is Bruner, to me, Notre Dame was borderline third for him coming into this visit. I think Wisconsin's his leader. I think Ohio State's done a really good job with him too. And you could kind of toggle Ohio State and Notre Dame and they're in that number 2 spot. It sounds like Notre Dame did a really good job with closing the gap on Wisconsin, who is the perceived leader. So even though Wisconsin is still the team to beat, it sounds like Notre Dame put themselves in striking distance for Joe Bruner, much more so than it was beforehand. Now, the key is for him and Carson Hinzman and Billy Strouth is you got to close.
Sure.
You got to close. And that's the key. And now the other thing I found out is they are recruiting him as a tackle. Now, I don't know whether he's going to stay a tackle in college, but they are at least telling him you're a tackle.
Gotcha.
And he'll get that shot at tackle. Wagner, the only thing I was told about him is, most of the info I got on Wagner was really kind of relates to Ohio State, actually.
Oh.
So reaching out to some of my sources at Ohio State, it sounds like Wagner is a take at Ohio State, but they're not pushing him yet. There's a couple guys higher on their board.
Sure.
And what I've said about Wagner in the past is if Ohio State wants him, he's going to Ohio State.
Gotcha.
So it sounds like that's the holdup. It's not necessarily given that Ohio State will take him now.
Sure.
And so depending on how things go is going to, it's kind of like, to me, it reminds me a lot of the Steve Angeli situation at quarterback, where Steve liked Notre Dame for a long time, but Notre Dame didn't necessarily give him the go-ahead to join the class. And once they did, it was a done deal. So in Ohio State, from a source that I talked to yesterday, the concern they have is the same one we have with Emil Wagner. Really talented, really athletic. Can he play? Can he get up to 290 plus and hold that weight and play at that weight? That's the question they're having.
Okay.
So,
size.
And yeah. But so that could be one that may end up working out in Notre Dame's favor, because the school that he wants ultimately doesn't take him.
Doesn't want him.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Obviously there was we've been talking about this for a week or more. The two wide receivers that were on campus, Nick Anderson and I'm going to butcher this, Alec Ayominor from he's the Canada originally from Canada, but playing in the States, I do believe.
In Massachusetts, yeah.
Yes. But those two were on campus. How did those visits go? Because we're all kind of wondering, what the direction is for the wide receiving core, obviously, in this class.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts there?
I haven't gotten a whole lot on them either.
Okay.
Just haven't heard a lot. And honestly, haven't asked a lot about them either, because I'm trying to work down my list. So I hope to get more on them. The one thing I was able to gather is I was curious, are these guys even takes? Like, if they wanted to commit, would they be takes? And from what I was told, they are.
Okay.
So that was, I guess, a little bit concerning for me, just because what does that mean for CJ Williams and Xavier Bradshaw and some of these other guys? But they didn't commit this weekend. And from the source I talked to, it doesn't sound like they were necessarily on commit watch this weekend, from what I was told. So I think these kids still have other visits to take, but
that's okay.
They are guys that, what I was told is Notre Dame would take as of right now. Now, what I also was told is they're not guys that they're waiting on. You know what I mean? So, like,
sure.
They're part of a group of guys that it's sort of it would seem to be sort of a first come, first serve type of situation.
Okay.
And, that's really the only thing I've been able to gather from them. And then the other stuff is obviously the commits were on campus this weekend.
5 of them. 5 commits on campus. Yeah, we don't want to forget about those guys.
Went really well with them. Nolan Ziegler was on campus with his whole family. He's got the most swagged up 3-year-old brother you're ever going to see in your life. His brother, there's a picture of his brother where he's 3. Okay, he's 3. He's got a Notre Dame helmet on, Rocket Ismail jersey. He's got sleeves, wristbands, and gloves, and he's doing this. I'm like, is he giving me upside down deuces? He's 3. And then I was like, yep, that's what he was doing. He was in the photo thing doing this.
Oh, that's hilarious.
That is the coolest 3-year-old I've ever met. But, that went really well. The thing that I've been told about the commits is that the Notre Dame staff with Burnham and with Ziegler has done a great job of showing, hey, look, here's why we're going after Junior at Tuihalamaka, and here's why we're going after Jalen Sneed, and here's why you are part of this as well. And so they've been able to show to the uncommitted and the committed players where they fit and how they can all play together, and the fact that those type of things. And then the other piece of this thing was too is, there were some, I don't say some question marks, but maybe it's kind of like, look, Nolan Ziegler, for example, committed to Notre Dame before Marcus Freeman arrived.
True.
And so there were some questions of, okay, do they really want him? And that was that's been erased in the last couple months, but that was only solidified when they canceled the Sebastian Cheeks visit this weekend. Because the reality is Notre Dame can only take 4 linebackers. It would have been very easy for the Notre Dame staff to go to Nolan and say, hey, look, we like you, but you got a commitment early. We got a new coaching staff, and they want to look at some other guys. And done with him what they did with Jack Nickel, right? We've seen them do this in the past, and it was not the case. It was like, no. You're a guy we want. Josh Burnham's the guy we want. It's not like, okay, you're the number 4 guy. It's like, hey, look, here's how you guys all fit together.
Sure.
And here's the what I mean. Look. It's to Burnham, to Sneed, to Ziegler. It's been the same thing. We want long, athletic guys that can play multiple positions.
Yep.
And that's what they do. So I think they did a great job with them. Obviously, Donovan Heinisch, I believe, was on campus this weekend. I haven't got anything back about him. Angeli, obviously, rock solid. He was on campus to be a commit. And I also was told that Stace and Raridan really hit it off well. The 2 tight end commits. Really hit it off well. and they're very excited about playing together and those type of things because Notre Dame did a great job of saying, hey, look, we don't just play one tight end here. So you can both play, and we've got guys from last year all going to play. So that went really well. So the committed kids really connected, and was a big part of it too. Is those 5 commits being on campus was very impactful this weekend, especially for like a guy like Xavier Nwankpa, because they kind of flocked to him a little bit, especially the defensive commits. Hey man, you look at our front 7. Look what we're doing. Now we need you, buddy, because they've got 7 kids committed in the front 7. Like literally, Notre Dame could put a starting defense on the field right now in the front 7. And they could. You could think about it.
Absolutely.
If you're 4-3, you got Gabera and Gagu at end. You could slide Tyson Ford into 3 technique, put Donovan Heinisch in nose. You've got Nolan Ziegler as your rover. You've got Junior as your Mike, and you've got Josh Burnham as your Will. That's a starting front 7 already in the class.
Yeah, that's
a really
shabby.
good.
Yeah.
And so it's like, hey man, you're next, man. We need you. And that was impactful because they didn't have a ton of commits on campus last weekend. So and Steve Angeli's been one of the biggest recruiters that they have. He's been very involved in calling kids and talking to kids, and hey, we want you. Ziegler's been a part of that. So it was really important to have those guys on campus this weekend. It was a very big, important part of it.
All right. Well, that kind of sums up the weekend and everything that you're hearing. Obviously, still some more information to obtain, but that's all.
Look, I would have liked to have had more info on a couple of the linemen and the receivers, but I'm not just going to throw out platitudes of it went great, everything's awesome, and just kind of. When I get good intel, we'll give you the intel, and we're going to keep efforting it. So tomorrow, if we learn some new stuff about it, we may talk about it at the beginning in front of the offensive line stuff, and then get in the offensive line stuff, or we may just wait till we get to the questions. But if I get more, and we're going to keep, as soon as I hang up with this, I'm going to get back on the phone and try to get some more information to see how things are going. But I'd say overall, it was a very successful weekend.
Excellent. All right, so let's jump into some comments. I'm sure that there are a ton. So we'll start at the top. I'm going to try to stay away from scrolling all the way down, Brian. Just a little peek behind the curtain so I don't lose. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
So if something pops up at the bottom that we have to hit,
I'll go down and get it. If we get like a super chat or anything like that, I'll go get it.
Exactly. Because, if I go down, I'll lose. All right, here we go. Jay jumping in says, trending for Singleton on Crystal Ball. Hopefully Coach Taylor strikes gold with the commitment within a few weeks. If he wants to go in the summer, it's going to be within a few weeks because there's only so much summer to go, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would think so. And like I said, one thing that I've heard is I would not be shocked if he doesn't make all his visits. And I think you can you understand what that would mean, right? Like you all understand what that would mean. If he doesn't make all his visits, there's a reason. There's a reason. Another decision has been made.
Correct.
Now the key for Notre Dame is you got to make sure he's feeling the same way on Thursday.
Correct. Absolutely.
That's the key is,
after you've gone home and had a chance to think about things. Yeah.
Right.
Jay also says, I have a really good feeling about Xavier Nwankpa. Gotta love how he spent time with Hamilton on his visit. Yeah. You broke that down really, really well as to how that went with Hamilton and
I didn't think I'd be as optimistic about him potentially being in the class on Friday as I am now. I didn't think I'd be this optimistic about it. Now, again, can you have him that excited tomorrow and Wednesday and Thursday? That's the key. But for where they are right now, they're in a lot better place now than I thought they were going to be.
Yep. Felix Fournier says Singleton joining the class would be huge. The offensive side needs some love too.
Yeah. Although that is a position I do think Notre Dame is strong at. He just would be the best of the 4. He'd be one of 4. If they get Singleton, that means Notre Dame in 2 years assigned 4 4-star running backs.
Right.
And in a 3-year span assigned 5, including Chris Tyree. What Nicholas Singleton would be, he'd be the highest ranked of the last 2 years.
Sure.
And honestly, in my opinion, the best as a junior. We got to see what he does as a senior, but he has the highest ceiling at least of all of them. So that would certainly be a big thing because if you're going to add a second back to this class, it needs to be that kind of guy. It needs to be a Dallin Hayden. It needs to be a Nicholas Singleton. It needs to be a guy with a very high ceiling because those other backs are good football players.
Yep.
And the thing that I also was told about what Notre Dame sold to Nicholas, and I didn't say it because it was kind of similar to what we said about Dallin last week, was they explained to him, we don't need you in this class. We've got Chris Tyree, who's only a sophomore. We signed 2 really good running backs last year. We got Jadarian Price. We don't need you. We want you.
There's a big
You're
difference,
that good.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And that's important because when you got that many backs, it can be like, okay, why are you still recruiting me? Like, you know what I mean? Right. Or are you just looking, and they did a good job of answering that question.
That's great. AJ says Singleton visiting Bama next weekend, though, and you touched on that.
Bama's not a school I'm concerned about with him.
Yeah, Jay says Bama already has 2 running back commitments in this cycle. They won't be a factor.
Well, I mean, they're going to be a factor because they're going to get him on campus. I mean, if they weren't still recruiting him, then they wouldn't be bringing him on campus. One of their 2 backs is a guy that can play multiple positions, and there's a reason that they're still recruiting Nicholas Singleton because they're going to move one of those backs somewhere else, in my opinion. Yep. But Bama's not a school that I'm overly concerned with at this point. It's going to be Penn State or Notre Dame, and right now I feel like it's definitely looking good for Notre Dame.
Zachary Lane says, speaking of running backs, any news on the Dallin Hayden OSU visit? Here's to hoping that it went poorly.
It did not go poorly.
It did not go poorly from what I saw.
Yeah, it's going to be his moment to share, but it did not go poorly. I mean, I don't want to get into much more of that because I respect Dallin and like you all know my policy on that. But I just say Ohio State's feeling even better about Dallin Hayden than Notre Dame is about Nicholas Singleton. If that answers that question.
There you go. Tracy says, "Hello all, going to be a great show as always.
Hopefully we lived up to it."
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Tyler Dijak says, seeing Ziegler next to Burnham and Rocco has me excited. Lots of room to fill out as long as he can keep his athleticism. Oh, boy. Brian, how do you evaluate his film to the competition? He dominated. I'm looking for his 2 out of 2. There it is. He dominated his competition a la Buckner. Just see the dominance and go from there. D4, 5 level football in Michigan doesn't churn out big-time talent, most D2 or D3 players.
Look, I've said this before. I don't care about competition. I don't. What you have to learn as an evaluator, and this is something I have had to learn for over 20 years. I mean, I got into coaching in 2001, right? So I've been evaluating film for 20 years it's my paid job, right? You look for skills, you look for skill sets, and especially having a coach at the Division III level, you have to be able to decipher, okay, what's the skill set?
Yep.
And a perfect example is you remember Amir Carlisle in high school. And when he signed with USC and Notre Dame was trying to recruit him out of high school, and he eventually transferred to Notre Dame, he was he would run through people as a running back in high school. And I said, look, the kid's not a top running back. You just watch the film, you say, what he's doing there does not translate to the next level. And that's the thing is, like, when you watch a Tyler Buckner, people say, well, he played against crap competition. But he put up just otherworldly numbers against that. Jack Kaiser's another example. Jack Kaiser just put up stupid numbers in high school, just ridiculous numbers, because he played at 1A football in Indiana. But being at 1A doesn't make you faster. It may make you look faster, but it doesn't make you faster. And so when you watch film, you can see how much ground the guy's covering up. You can say, hey, that guy's fast for that level. It's exactly what I've said about Amorian Walker, right? People say, well, look at that 95-yard kickoff return that went for a touchdown. I say, yeah, but he's not – that's not happening if he's playing against a team in Miami. It doesn't project. Now, again, not to open up that can of worms, I hope that speed does show up as a senior. But the point is, you have to be able to decipher now what, you have to know the type of competition. That is key. That is important. You have to be aware and cognizant of the competition, because otherwise you're saying, boy, this guy's like 4 yards past everybody. Well, he plays against crap competition. So you have to pay attention to other things. So Nolan Ziegler, you look at and you see length, incredible length, 6'4", 205. This is why he was a guy that we at Irish Breakdown, Vince, we had as a 4-star top 250 guy from day one. Now everybody's kind of catching up to that, right?
Right. Yep.
He's every bit of 6'3.5". He's over 200 pounds. I've had a chance to watch a lot of his lacrosse film. You see quickness, agility, change of direction, great hips, great hand-eye coordination. Because it's a lot like watching a kid play basketball. When you watch a guy dribble or catch and shoot, you're seeing that hand-eye foot coordination. In lacrosse, I've tried to play lacrosse. I mean, just for fun. I looked unathletic doing it because it's awkward, like with the stick and the ball, and so you see that and you're saying, okay, this is a kid's got great feet, great athleticism, great explosiveness, and then you see his frame and you say he's 205 now, and he's not close to being done filling out. Partly because he plays sports year round. I mean, it's hard to put on a ton of weight when you're playing lacrosse because those cats just run.
Yep,
and they just run all day. And so you just see the skill set, Tyler, and that's what you look for. You don't necessarily look for numbers because, look, I coached at the D3, the last D3 school I was at. I recruited a running back in high school that rushed for almost 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns in high school. That's absurd numbers for a high school running back. But you look at the skill set, and he dominated people, but you also saw a kid that didn't have speed. He didn't have explosiveness for that scholarship level. It was great for us, played for as a freshman for us, but you have to be able to decipher that. And I think that I have a pretty good job of doing that. It's like the same thing with Golden Tate. People say, oh, Golden Tate didn't play against bad competition. Yeah, but him jumping 40 inches off the ground to catch a pass is not because he played against bad competition. He can jump 40 inches to catch a pass. And that's the thing. And I do think it takes some experience to be able to decipher that. Like what's fast, how do you determine fast when the competition is a certain way?
The other nice thing is they all play on the same size field. So, I mean, you can see how much ground a guy is covering.
And that's the key. Yeah. That's the key. You're not watching them pull away from guys. You're watching them cover ground.
How many strides does it take to get from 5 yard?
Right.
10, I mean, you can
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Let's see here. Jonathan, what's up, Jonathan? He says it's raining in St. Louis, but I've got my good luck gap closer shirt on, hoping for some good news about a few key prospects. I think we gave you some good news.
Well, and I think Nicholas Singleton, and for the record, he is a gap closer.
Oh yeah,
no question.
Agree. Yes,
Xavier Nwankpa is a gap closer. I mean, correct. No question. So there were definitely some of those guys on campus. Carson Hinzman, to me, is not a gap closer because we've talked about that. Notre Dame doesn't have a gap to close on the offensive line, but he is a guy that stabilizes that.
Sure,
which I think they need.
Yeah, right.
Because I have not liked what they've done on offensive line recruiting in the last couple of years. Top level guys, great. The depth is the concern.
Sure.
And if you can add a Hinzman, and this, because this was the knock on last year's class, right? 2 studs, big drop off after that. Hinzman would give you a third top player, which is what the last 2 class, the 2020, they had 2 linemen, period. 2. Last year, they had 2 studs. And then after that, you have Joe Alt, who I like. It's a project. Caleb Johnson's just a solid player. And then Pat Coogan's not. What you haven't been able to get is that third dude. So you look at the 2017 class. You had Robert Hainsey and Aaron Banks, but then you also had Josh Luck. And then you look at like the 2014 group. Yeah, you had Alex Bars and Quentin Nelson, but you also had Sam Mustapher, right? And that to me is the thing that separates a great 5-man class from a top-heavy 5-man class, which is what last year's group was. So you get Carson Hinzman, and now Ty Chan or Joey Tenona becomes your 3rd best lineman in this class.
Yeah,
that's where you need to be. That's where you need to be.
Yep.
So to me, not a gap closer, but he keeps the gap where it is, because right now it's Notre Dame, Bama, Oklahoma, and Ohio State, and then everybody else, in my opinion. Georgia had a couple good years with Sam Pittman, but he's gone now, and I don't think that's going to continue. But that's the key there.
Let's see here. Sorry about that. Coleman says, "Do we make up any ground with Xavier?"
That was the key. Yeah.
The short answer is yes.
And we're getting a little bit long on time, Vince. So we, things like that we've definitely answered. We don't have to pull up with. I think people understand we answered that question.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Absolutely. Let's see here, and then Coleman asked about Carson Hinzman. You just mentioned that, so not going to throw that one up there.
And I do want to respond to something that AJ said, because AJ's talking about. He says Alabama is always a factor. Not really. Not every kid wants to go to Alabama, right? That's just the reality of it. Not every kid wants to go there. And when they've already got multiple backs in the class, look, I'm not as worried about Alabama. It's like, look, all of a sudden, Amorian Walker's just going to flip to Alabama because they offered. No, because there's things that Notre Dame has to sell now. Notre Dame's in a different place now than they've been in a long time, because again, they've been in the playoff 2 of the last 3 years. So Alabama's pitch is still going to work, but there are kids looking to do something different. Do I want to go to Bama and beat their 8th title team, or do I want to go somewhere else and be part of a first? But you're not going to go somewhere that that they've never been better 9-3, right? Because they're not going to turn the corner, and so that's why I'm not. I mean, I could turn to be wrong. I could turn out to be wrong, but I don't think Alabama is going to be a player in this one. It's going to be Notre Dame or Penn State when we're talking about Nicholas Singleton on this one.
Terry says, shout out to Brian, hardest working man in all things Irish. So
I appreciate that.
Well done, sir.
I appreciate that.
Hey, Bob 157. Apparently, Emil Wagner really connected with the coaches. I know it's hard to get kids from that part of Ohio, but it helps that he spent some time with Freeman and Mickens, who went to his high school.
Look, Notre Dame's done a good job there. It's just about whether or not Ohio State wants them.
Yeah,
and honestly,
Ohio
that's
State's is number one.
To.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean,
it is what it is.
If Ohio State wants him and they push and say, "Hey, look, we want you," we'll absolutely do that. Hey, and I did not answer. You had Anthony Stouffer's question up. I actually never answered it because we were still talking about. The Singleton one.
I'm sorry. What?
So, it's just 2 up.
This one, there we go. Sounds like Hayden to OSU is a done deal. I'm in Columbus and hearing they did a tremendous job with him. Would have loved it to land him.
They did a great, and this is the thing that I think we talked about this before his visit to Notre Dame was Notre Dame had to be able to separate themselves, but the concern with Ohio State was, look, Ohio State's one of those red carpet programs, right? They just are. They do a good job of selling the Real Life Wednesdays and the academics and all that, but they put on a show, and that's just some kids. Yeah, some kids it's not good or bad. I like Dalton Hayden a lot as a young man. I think he's a really good young kid. I mean, really good. Comes from a great family. But some kids are just going to be a little bit more impacted by that than others. That's at the end of the day, that's just going to be the deal.
Bert Farron says, which follow-up game do you think will be tougher? Cincinnati after Wisconsin or UNC after Southern Cal? I think that's a good question.
I think it's going to be Cincinnati after Wisconsin because it's earlier in the year. And I'll go down and get that, Vince, because I have lost the top.
Sounds good.
But I think part of it too, Bert, is the pre-bye week is going to be the toughest part of the year for Notre Dame for me. Because you have so many, you do have some new faces. It's, you have a new quarterback working with new skill and offensive linemen still got to mesh. I think when you get to North Carolina or USC, I think it's North Carolina, then USC, or is it USC, then North Carolina? I can't ever remember which one it is. But that second game is going to be like, game 7 or 8 by that point in time. You've had a bye week. I feel like they're going to be closer to their full potential then, whereas that Wisconsin game. Plus, here's the other part. That Wisconsin-Cincinnati, that is back-to-back physical football teams.
Sure.
And UNC and USC are not that they're not physical. It's just
but it's a different
style of play. Wisconsin and Cincinnati, they play physical style. Even there's physical kids at USC, there's physical kids at North Carolina, but their style of play is not physical, hard-nosed football. With this one, it will be. I mean, you're talking about back-to-back. I mean, Wisconsin is – we all know it. They play big boy football.
Absolutely.
Cincinnati is a team that is a physical football team. And so that to me is going to make it is going to make that one challenge, combined with the fact that it's still earlier. So we got a super chat from John A1. John, appreciate that very much. In 2021, Notre Dame landed Kerry G and Justin Walters. How does a class of potentially Nwankpa, Pope, and Bellamy fit to work together with those guys? So I think number one, because you have a guy like Pope and Bellamy who could potentially be slot guys, you can now play a 3-safety offense or defense, where you don't have to put a corner there. So I think that gives you some big boy potential, where maybe you can put a bigger body kid there maybe than a corner. But bigger, not necessarily tall, but thicker. So I think it gives you that. It completely solidifies the depth chart. And from what I'm told from multiple people, Marcus Freeman is adamant about playing depth. So he doesn't want anybody playing every single snap, and so they're going to have some depth. And so when you look at this one, you see the fact that, look, you got 5 guys for 2 positions, but you needed that. You needed at least 4 in the 2-year span. Now you can get away with it because, as we've talked about in the past, there are corners last year and this year that could play safety. What this kind of class does is it means you can leave those kids a corner longer to allow them to see who really separates themselves a corner. You don't have to rush into some decisions like they had to do with KJ Wallace, to be honest with you. They had to move KJ away from corner before they really knew what he could do at corner because of the depth issues at safety. You're not going to have to do that with Philip Riley and JoJo and Chance Tucker and Devin Moore and Benjamin Morrison if you're able to get all those guys, right? The other part of this too is you have some different body types. So Kerry G and Xavier Nwankpa, taller, longer, rangier. Xavier can do it all. I think Kerry's a really good alley player. Justin's an alley player, I think, but Kerry also has the length to play some center field. Jake Pope is a kid that's a really rangy, athletic kid that could also play some slot cover player. So gives you some unique skill sets, but more importantly than anything, John, it rebuilds the depth chart. This is important because number one, it's needed, but then number two, now you're finally back to a good numbers place. So then when you start focusing on 2023,
now you can go
you're
ahead
back to looking for the impact.
You go ahead.
And that's the key.
Yep, exactly. Bert says also, thank you for bringing a community of people passionate about Notre Dame football together and letting us contribute and ask questions. It truly is something special. Great job, gentlemen. And
that makes it fun.
I was going to say, is that like our mission statement? Because I feel like that's exactly what we want to do.
Well, look,
Irish Breakdown.
When we first started Irish Breakdown at the very beginning, it was the same way with our message board. I mean, one of the things that the people at SI and Maven praised Irish Breakdown for from the moment we signed on at the end of September of 2019 was, wow, you guys have the kind of community that we want. Now, of course, then they took our message board away, and we're having a meeting, a big publishers meeting tomorrow, where that's going to be a topic of conversation. We were told the people that want the board be in tomorrow's publisher meeting. So hopefully we'll get some good news about that. But the big thing that they wanted, and this is part of the reason I jumped on board, is because I wanted to do it a little bit differently, in that the community part was always going to be a big part of this thing, okay, which is not just, I mean, it's not just about putting out content. It's about creating a community that these people, and this is something I'll be honest with you. You know, we don't have the greatest relationship now, but this is something that I learned from Mike Frank when I first got into this thing, because he had an independent site, and there was like a loyalty like that. Hey, we kind of stand out. We're different from everybody else. And that community part was really a really important part of what we did there. And I've always liked that. And I wanted to do a little bit different because I want to provide the kind of content that we're doing, but I also want to provide this sort of community in a wider array of forums. So it's not just a message board. Some people don't want to get on the internet. Some people want to be a part of something like this where it's interactive. You can ask questions and we can engage. And for me, this works better too, because I think how I engage verbally is different than how I engage written.
It's fair.
And I think I can come off a lot more standoffish when I write than when I talk, because I'm just kind of matter of fact.
Yeah,
but when we're in this kind of forum, my matter of factness comes off as just how it's meant. It's like we're just talking, right?
Right, exactly.
But in a written form, it can come across as dismissive, and that's never my intention. If I'm being dismissive, you'll know, right? But I think this format helps too, because it's more of like, I like to be talked to, not not talked at, or not you know. Sure. And this is the nice thing about this is I think it creates another platform, but it's all built around creating a sense of community where people can feel like they're part of it, you know, and like you'll see in our chats, like people will start answering questions that people are asking.
Yeah, I know. Which
like
is
not
great.
even letting us get to it. And it's like, that's great, because it's like
awesome.
They're clearly paying attention. They've been, and they feel engaged. And that's what I've always wanted to build.
Yep, I completely agree. Ashley's jumping in, says, love what you guys are doing and how you present the Irish. That's important to us as well.
Absolutely.
So thanks, Ashley. Coleman says, I know he did not visit this weekend, but what is the scoop on Shrouth? Is he making a commitment soon? From everything I've read early, his family is Notre Dame fans, and he really likes Jeff Quinn.
Coleman, that's a mystery. And I can't say too much, because let's just say I'm going to have a lot to say on this subject whenever he commits somewhere. Okay.
Interesting.
I expect it to be soon. I don't know what's going on. I really don't.
Because for a while there, it was feeling really good about Notre Dame.
And I have not heard anything different. From my sources. It's just, I don't know what's going on.
Sure.
So I think that everything you said is true, Coleman. I don't know what he's waiting on. So when he makes a decision, whether it's for Notre Dame or Wisconsin, I'll have a lot to say about that one. Okay. I just don't want to get too the reason I'm saying that is if I get too much deeper into it, then I'm going to give away stuff. And I think you all know my stance. That's, that's why we don't make predict, those kind of prediction things. And yeah.
Doug says, waited all weekend for this show. You guys are killing it. I think that's awesome. Doug. Yeah. Appreciate that. Revolver 6238, Brian, are you concerned about being in Tallahassee at night for game one? I
think that plays into Notre Dame's favor, because I think
like being a big, like the only game in town kind of thing. Yes. Only game in the country, right? It's the only thing going on. Notre Dame's
going to be I feel like those are the kind of games, for the most part, when rain isn't involved, those are the games where Notre Dame's kind of been at their best.
Sure.
You know, it's like it's a big game. It's a big moment. You're not going to overlook a team that's on prime time Sunday night, right? Like,
Sure.
I get nervous when you're playing some team at noon.
Right.
It's like, oh, okay, clearly it's not an important game, right?
Yeah.
You know, so now it's like the big
Overlooked.
games are the night games, you
Right.
know. And in the last 2-3 years, those are the moments that Notre Dame's been, and they haven't always won those games. I mean, they lost to Georgia in 2019 at a night game, but they battled Georgia. They never backed down from Georgia. They went toe to toe with Georgia. They just didn't execute, but it was not a lack of fire, push, or whatever. I mean, you know, I feel like that's really when they, for the most part, been at their best. And I think it's gonna make it more certain that Notre Dame is prepared and ready and locked in for Florida State. And I think the fact that they play Toledo the next week, Revolver, is another reason I'm not as concerned about this, because there's no need to overlook Florida State.
Right.
Because you have a lesser opponent in name come the next week.
Sure.
And the other part of it too is I'd be more nervous about this game in Tallahassee if it was game 3, but it's game 1, which means that's all. There's one opponent the Notre Dame coaches are going to talk about all fall camp.
Right.
And that's Florida State.
Exactly.
So, you know, the only thing, and again, I don't think Tallahassee is exactly like this. It's not like you're playing in Happy Valley, right? At a whiteout game.
Have you been down there?
I have. I was there for the 2014 game.
Okay.
And it was loud, but it's like, it's not this place where it's like you can't hear. It's not like this raucous, you know, 110,000 whiteout thing. It's not that kind of crowd. It's a good crowd. There's going to be plenty of Notre Dame people there, and they're just not your typical Florida State. And I think Mike Norvell's doing a great job, and he's going to get them back on track, but it's not going to be week 1 of the 2021 season. If they lose to Florida State, that means I'll have the same feeling as like when they lost to Texas in 2016. Like,
yeah, this
is problematic because Texas wasn't that good. And the rest of the year proved out that Texas wasn't that good.
Yeah, right. Fair enough. Coleman says, also, is Cyrus Moss like Snead? Is it more of a Notre Dame Oregon battle?
I'd flip it and say it's more of an Oregon ... Notre Dame, Clemson, Florida. And what I mean by that is the Snead was Notre Dame, Oregon. It was can Oregon catch Notre Dame?
Yeah,
that was the thing. This is where Notre Dame's trying to catch Oregon, but those aren't the only 2 schools involved. Clemson's involved. Florida's involved.
Yeah,
he's going to make fall visits, so it's a little bit of a different situation. And that one was a 2 bad. And I said this when he visited Oregon. Tennessee is not a factor in Jalen Snead's recruitment. It was Notre Dame and Oregon. Even though he had a Tennessee visit schedule, it was going to be Notre Dame and Oregon. This is a different deal. I think it's Notre Dame and Oregon are definitely in that top group, but I don't think Notre Dame is number 2 right now with him. And I think there are more people at play, in my opinion.
So it just kicked me down. So I lost a couple up at the top. So if anybody has anything that's prior that you want to get in, please comment at the bottom. I apologize. It just automatically pushed me to the bottom for some reason. But Nicholas Galley says, I know Nwankpa is predicted to the Ohio State University, but we really, really need to go after him. No safety commit so far. And other than him, we just have 1 or 2 3-star prospects. He would be a game changer.
Okay, a couple things on there. There's a few things that I definitely agree with from Nicholas on this one.
Okay.
They definitely need to push for him, and they are. And that's the big important thing. And they've been pushing for him for a long time. So Nicholas is right. This kid is a game changer. I mean, we have the shirts for kids like this, right? This is the kind of kid we have in mind when we made the Gap Closer shirts, which, if you're not familiar with, our store is the first link in below of the description area below. But he's absolutely that. And so, yes, you're right. They need to push for him. And he's predicted Ohio State. But as we said at the beginning of the show, and Nicholas, I think you got with us late, I would encourage you to go back to the beginning of the show once we're done. I don't think you can do it now, but when we're done. And we talked a lot about Xavier. And I think Notre Dame did a really, really good job with him this weekend. The other part of it is, you know, that we only have 1 or 2 3-star prospects. I don't put a lot in that. When I watch Jake Pope's film, I don't see a 3-star prospect. I just don't.
Okay.
I don't. You know, he's another guy like that. But, you know, there's been some pretty good safeties. Notre Dame had arguably the best safety tandem in the country. They were definitely top 5 in 2018. And that was a 2-star and a 3-star, Alohi Gilman and Jalen Elliott, right? Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't put a ton into the rankings in that regards. Can a kid play? Does he fit the system? Those are the things you look at. Does Notre Dame have to continue to upgrade their talent at safety? Yes. Are a lot of the other safeties on the board after Xavier Nwankpa gap closers? Not necessarily, but they're good football players. So I do think there's some other good players on the board, but we also have to be honest about it. if they don't get Nwankpa, there's a big drop off between those. I think Jake Pope's a really good football player. I think KJ Winston's got some skills. Again, very inexperienced, hard to really get a feel because he's played so little, but he's big. He's got some range and athleticism and all that. But even at their best, I mean, if we're being honest and objective, Xavier Nwankpa is clearly the best safety on the board and would be the best safety they've signed since Kyle Hamilton. And if you go pre-Kyle Hamilton, I don't know that they've signed a better safety since Harrison Smith all the way back in 2007. And I was someone who was very high on Harrison Smith when he signed. Another guy that played at a really tiny high school that a lot of people didn't give enough credit to him coming out of high school for multiple reasons, but one was because he played against, bad competition.
Okay. I think I was at the tail end of a discussion going back and forth with some people. So I'm trying to get back to.
I got one. Here's the next question. Jeff Nantkis. I hope I'm saying that right, Jeff. I apologize. I'm not. If anyone thinks Notre Dame doesn't have a legit shot at landing top talent, has never been to campus. If you're just here to hate on Notre Dame, why don't you just go get your own team's chat? So I guess that's in response to some other things that were being said. But I think that's absolutely true. And, the funny thing is to that, Vince, is you hear that from teams that visit Notre Dame all the time. You talk to remember when we did the college football show, we had a Georgia fan on here. It was really, really cool guy. But he said, look, my opinion, he basically was like, my opinion changed of Notre Dame when we visited. And I've talked to literally hundreds, because when we were down in Athens a couple years ago, I was there with a buddy of mine, and we were at a restaurant. He had Notre Dame gear on. I had I had stuff that was Notre Dame colors, although I never wore Notre Dame stuff, as you know. But they'd come, we were at that game, totally changed my opinion of Notre Dame. If you've never been to Notre Dame's campus, you don't understand what makes Notre Dame unique. And people who do say things like that really aren't college football fans. They're fans of that one team. And they're people that aren't worth getting upset over, is what I would say to all Notre Dame fans.
Our guy Connor, my favorite stay-at-home dad, he says, my apologies if this was covered. Is Jair Brown still in the mix?
He is not.
Okay.
He is not.
Simple there. Let's see here.
Here's one. This is from Lou Holtz to wrap it up. If you've been there, no explanation is necessary. If you haven't, none is adequate, referring to Notre Dame.
Right.
So
let's see. It's a lot of going back and forth.
Brent Byer had in response about the Oklahoma thing. Oklahoma putting fancy cars in the end zone. That screams we have nothing to truly offer. Like, heed no attention to the man behind the curtain, merely a shiny distraction. I kind of agree with that, Brent. I mean, I'm one of those people that says, I get it, but what you're doing is you're appealing to youth as opposed to trying to sell these kids and say, if you're trying to say we're going to try to help you grow into a man, what is the objective? Is your objective to say, hey, you come here someday, you're going to be able to find you're going to be able to buy a nice fancy car. Well, here's the difference between Notre Dame and Oklahoma. You can buy that car with a Notre Dame degree, whether you play football or not. And that's the thing but it just seems kind of juvenile, like you're appealing to the lowest common denominator. It's almost like hey, we want to, let's not talk about academics. Let's not talk about these things that are going to truly help you grow into a man. Let's talk about these shiny, nice cars, right? It's
I hear you.
It's petty in my opinion.
I got one for you here, Brian. Yep. Michael Morris jumping in. He says, if in the spring, Moss and Darren Agu were at the same camp together, and Agu was the best defensive player at the camp. I mean, by far the best. Do you think that has anything to do with Moss and his hesitation?
No, I don't think Cyrus Moss is afraid of competition. If he was, he wouldn't be looking at Florida and Clemson.
Sure.
I just think it's also practical. So if you're a quarterback and you're really good and you signed and you're a year behind Trevor Lawrence, I'm not afraid of competition, but I also don't want to sit for 2 years and have no chance of playing. It's just common sense. Like, it's not, again, people think that a guy makes a decision that's based for him to get earlier playing time. It's about he's not afraid of competition. Some kids, that's true. Most, it's not. It's just like I'm also reading the tea leaves and I want to go somewhere I'm going to have more of an opportunity to play.
Sure.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, every kid should factor that as part of their decision. So I don't think Cyrus Moss is afraid of competition, but I also think that if I go somewhere where I'm the best end and there's only 2 ends in the class and they didn't necessarily sign any talented ends last year, I'm going to have a better shot at playing than going to Notre Dame where they're going to have 3 stud ends in the class that I'm in. Jordan Patojo is going to be there. You know what I mean? It's just
the top guys. Sense. I would say from the top guys I've been around that I've talked to, they don't shy away from competition because they're very confident in their ability.
Right. They also understand in today's football, like, look, there's 2 starting ends, right?
Yeah.
There's not just one.
Yeah.
It's like people say, well, do you think Zach Rice is worried about Blake Fisher starting? Well, no, because they start 2 tackles.
Right. I love that response, by the way. Tom Burke. Now that the big June recruiting visits are coming to an end, I feel it's time for the next marketing surprise. Have you heard anything that's on the horizon?
No, I think they're at the point now where they're just going to continue hammering the stuff that they have. And I think the thing with Notre Dame right now, Tom, is once they get through these visits and July hits, it's time to start focusing on their team. It's going to be players are now here. They're in summer school. Camp's a month away. It's time to start really locking in on the team. And I did want to respond to something here, Vince, before you pull up the next one.
Yeah.
This is from Old Grim. Are we losing more than we're winning? I'm curious, Old Grim. I might have missed the context. Can you follow up? Are you referring to recruiting, or was that a response to the previous debate that was raging that I clearly missed? It looks like I'm kind of happy.
Well, it was Clemson fan checking out our recruiting, things like that, and for the most part, I would say it was fairly respectful. From what I can tell, I just didn't think it was necessary to put it up.
Yeah,
it's just the guys going back.
No, I'm cool with that. I didn't see most of that.
Yeah, so absolutely. I'm reading the tea leaves as well based on some of the comments. Let's see here. Ladarius is the Clemson fan, I do believe, but he says, how many running backs do you have in the 22 class?
Right now they have 1. So they have Jadarian Price, who's a top 250 caliber player from the state of Texas.
Yes.
So he committed to Notre Dame. What was it, back in, I think, February?
Yeah, it's been a bit. It's
pretty early.
Yeah.
Talented running back, has over 3,000 career yards in the class. They're just – and the thing is too, Ladarius, to give context, since you're not a Notre Dame fan, Notre Dame went through a stretch of about 4 years where they had a former running back who was a great player at Notre Dame, all-time leading rusher. But he wasn't that great of a coach, and he was a really bad recruiter. And so Notre Dame, starting with Chris Tyree's class, which was the current running backs coach, Lance Taylor's first class, Notre Dame's still kind of rebuilding the depth chart, whereas a few years ago, Notre Dame had a pretty good depth chart. I mean, there was a time where Dexter Williams was the number 4 back on the depth chart. And so they're having to rebuild that, and they're actually good if they don't get a second back, but the kids on the board right now are just too good not to go after.
Big Jim says, just read Wagner said something very interesting about Notre Dame, refreshing to be around people like me. Very Jerry Tillery of him.
Yeah,
that was interesting.
I think, look, I'll say this: if Emil Wagner was not from Huber Heights, Ohio, I would feel very good about where Notre Dame stands with this.
That's fair. Yeah.
It's just, look, if and anyone who's from Ohio, like I grew up in Ohio, I lived there till I was 15. And the reason I claim Virginia as my home state is because A, my dad was from there, but B, if you had the option of the two, why wouldn't you pick Virginia over Ohio? But anyone that grew up in that state knows that's a hard place to turn down if you're from there.
Sure.
It just is. And most of those kids grew up as Ohio State fans. And so if he wasn't from Ohio, I would actually feel like Notre Dame was going to get the kid. So when I say they don't have much of a shot, it's not that I don't think they're doing a good job with him. I think they're doing a really good job with him. It's just I know how hard it is. And with all due respect to Jeff Quinn, he's not Harry Hiestand. He's not going to go into those places and get those big-time players that Ohio State wants, like Hiestand did with Liam Eichenberg and Tommy Kramer and Jimmy Byrne. It's just not going to happen.
Richard Robinson says, one guy nobody's talking about is Donovan Heinisch. I think he is a more athletic version of his brother. Do you think he could be a starting defensive lineman like Kurt?
Richard, I agree with your assessment. When we did the show on Donovan, his commitment show, that's one thing that we talked about is he's not quite as big as Kurt was at the same age, and I'll get to that. But athletically, I definitely think he's a better athlete than Kurt was. And that's saying something because Kurt's a decent athlete for his size. The concern I have, Richard, is as you shift to more of a 3-down defense, you don't need Lewis Nix at nose tackle, but you need somebody that's probably bigger than 270 pounds to be there a lot. And so for me, my only concern with Donovan is, can he fill out the way that Kurt did? Can he get to that 290, 295 and still maintain his quickness? I think that's the question mark that I have with that one.
Jojo says, hey, Coach D and Vince, I know Coach won't like to hear this, but it sounds like Notre Dame will take either Ayo Minor or Anderson. CJ may commit when he visits, and then they're going to wait for Merriweather. No Bradshaw.
Number one, I don't see CJ committing during his visit to Notre Dame. We'll see, but I don't see that. But as we talked about that at the beginning of the show, I mentioned that already, that both of those guys are takes. I don't know if they're going to take both of them, but I found out today that they are definitely takes. But I just let it play out. Let's not, we do this every show, right? Like we kind of get into this thing like, here's the latest crystal balls and here's the latest trending in this direction. Just let it play out, right? Because a week ago, people were saying it's trending towards Notre Dame from Dallin Hayden, and there was a lot of reason for that, a lot of buzz, but that's why I say let the visits happen first, right? A week ago, we would not have been talking about Nicholas Singleton potentially being in the class at any minute because that's not where things were trending. It looked like Notre Dame was really pretty much out of it with Nicholas Singleton. So let's just let this stuff play out.
Thomas Walsh, what do you know about Jack Lausch, who's committed to baseball and football? He's a quarterback. I'm assuming this is more of a baseball guy.
It's a baseball one. That's a baseball guy. And from what I heard, it's a big one for the baseball team. But I haven't watched them play.
Paul says, Brian and Vince, thanks for the great update show. No problemo.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion about the top 5 class going on here. I did want to respond to a couple things to Ladarius's comment. In order for y'all to finish top 3, this is you said the Clemson fan, you need to pull at least 3 5-star recruits. That's not accurate. And I've actually done the math on this. They have a point system at Rivals, and 247 maybe is a little bit different. I'm more looking at the Rivals class, but they don't. There's 2 ways to get a top class, and this is the fault that I've been pointing out the entire time. If you get a few high 5 stars, the value of 5 stars is, to me, significantly higher than the others, which I think is faulty. Because if you're a 5-star and you're ranked 25th, and then you're a 4-star and you're ranked 26th, why is there a giant points difference between those 2 players, right? There shouldn't be. Okay, but there is. My point being is you punch in the numbers, there's 2 ways to get a top 5 class. Number 1 is to land a few 5 stars, like Ladarius is talking about. The other way is to have a bunch of high 4-star guys, and that's what Notre Dame is projected to get if they finish. So if they get Nicholas Singleton, and here's the thing: when I punched in the numbers last week for this, and Notre Dame's class would have ranked 2nd or 3rd for Rivals in like 5 of the last 6 years. It did not include Nicholas Singleton; it included Dallin Hayden. Nicholas Singleton is ranked higher than Dallin Hayden in every service. Right? It didn't include C.J. Williams and Tobias Merriweather. It just included one of them. It didn't include all 3 of the highest ranked offensive linemen. It actually recruited some of the lower ranked ones. So trying to make it a realistic class. And so if you sign 9 or 10 top 100 guys, you're going to have a great shot at having a top 5 class. And that's the other way to get there. And again, it's looking at how do the numbers that they would get in that situation stack up to past numbers. Or past rankings, where would that ranking total fall? And it was top 2 or 3, and like I said, like 5 of the last 6 years. So there's multiple ways to get it done if you understand how the ranking systems work. And I've also said I don't give a crap about finishing the top 5 in a point-based system. I care more about SI 99s or SI All-Americans top rank because they actually make it more subjective. We look at did you meet your needs? Did you get depth? Did you, because Florida State's finishing in the top 5 for years, and they'd sign like no offensive linemen or a bunch of bums on the offensive linemen, and no good players here. But then they'd sign like 5 linebackers that were ranked in the top 150. Right. It's like, well, so was they going to play a 11-on-11 with like 9 linebackers? Is that what they're going to do? Is this a 7-on-7 league? Right. Wouldn't sign any good quarterbacks, but they'd sign 3 big time receivers. Well, not having good quarterbacks has kind of come back to haunt them in recent years. So, and the other thing too is Clemson in the last decade has had 2 top 5 classes? And you're a Clemson fan. They've had like 2 top 5 classes.
Sure.
So that stuff doesn't matter to me. Are you getting talent? That's what I care about.
Yeah, right. Robert says, guys, in the last 5 years, what Notre Dame player do you think was most affected by injuries? I'm going with Dr. Sean Crawford.
Okay. I'm going to say Javon McKinley.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah. All right. I think Javon was, his high school film was just ridiculous. And you're talking about doing it against competition. This kid had 50 catches and 1,000 yards and 10 plus touchdowns as a junior receiving yards in the playoffs.
Right.
And he played against De La Salle, St. John Bosco, Orange Lutheran. They played against Sarah, which had like 3 D1 DBs in their secondary. It's just absurd, the numbers he put up. But he he had a lot of injuries early in his career, and I think he lost a little bit of a step from that.
Matthew says if they swept the Wisconsin guys on the O-line, that's a D1 starting offensive line in one class.
Yeah, because you'd have Tanona, Chan, Bruner, Schrouth, and Hinzman.
Right.
I could see that 5. I mean, look, all 5 of those guys are not going to start. That's just the way that football works. I mean,
right, sure.
But to his point, yeah, I mean, you'd have Hinzman as the center. You'd have Chan as, one of your tackles. You'd have either Tanona or Schrouth as one of your tackles, or Bruner. I mean, I like Bruner better as a guard, but you've got 3 guys that could potentially play tackle. One of them has to, between Tanona, Bruner, and Schrouth.
Yeah.
3 of them could play tackle. Chan definitely can. And then the other 2 guys play guard. So, yeah, he's absolutely right. If they swept the Wisconsin guys, first of all, beyond that, that'd be great recruiting. To go into Wisconsin for Jeff Quinn and Tommy Rees to go into Wisconsin and get all 3 of those guys that Wisconsin wants wouldn't just be great for recruiting from who you're adding, but what kind of statement would that be?
Absolutely.
And all the concerns that I do have about Jeff Quinn's recruiting, which are valid based on what we've seen his entire tenure so far, those questions would be erased, in my opinion, if he got all 3 of those guys.
Big Jim, kind of on the same wavelength, says, can't believe we're in on 3 Wisconsin offensive line kids.
Gotta close, though.
No, absolutely.
Close. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Even if they get 2 of them, look, even if they only get 2, I don't expect them to sweep Wisconsin. That's to me, that'd be like, going into Alabama and stealing a bunch of top 50 kids. I mean, to get stud linemen from Wisconsin, that's hard to do. So I don't expect them to get all 3. I think they do need to get 2, though, based on where the current board is. And I think 2 is doable. But if they got all 3, I mean, that would be a huge, huge recruiting coup. Huge coup.
Jojo says, hey, coaches, do you think Moss is more hesitant with Notre Dame because of the guys already on board?
Nah, we addressed that earlier. I mean,
want to throw that out.
Yeah, we those, because we're getting kind of close to 2 hours, Vince. If there's a repeat of a question we've already asked, we don't need it.
Yep, no problem.
And I hope you all understand. I mean, we are answering your question. We're just doing it.
Sure.
And that's something I can kind of help with. Maybe some of these shows not going quite as long.
Tommy says, real life Wednesdays?
It's this thing that Ohio State does, and they actually do it beautifully. I mean, if you're being honest, and it's real life Wednesdays where they talk. It's something they do at Ohio State, and I'm not sure of all the particulars, but it's essentially their program to get kids jobs. First number, get internships, but then also to get jobs. And there's good placement for football players. They
send them out.
Well, it's part of it, but it's a bigger picture thing. But it's also about, they'll have people come in and talk to them that are like, business leaders from the community and from Ohio and things like that to say, hey, look, we look for Ohio State. It's actually a really good deal. It's what I would encourage every school to do, is have a plan in place to say, hey, we're going to make sure we're helping these kids that need to get jobs that aren't just going to go to the NFL. And that's a really good deal. And I like what they do, and they sell it really well.
Sure.
Notre Dame obviously can match it and surpass it in a big way. But it's good on Ohio State to try to, they found something like, look at a team like, place like Notre Dame and some of these other places have this. We need to find a way to negate that. And here's what we do. And
smart.
It was something that Urban Meyer brought in, and they've really done a great job with it.
Jeff Fluke. Sorry if I butchered that. He says, more impressive, Ziegler's brother or Nwankpa's Nwankpa rocking the Tupac shirt.
So just from a pure joy thing, obviously I thought I had my phone on silent. From a pure joy thing, the 3-year-old rocking the Notre Dame gear just melted my heart. I mean, just melted my heart. From just a respect thing. Yeah. It's the Tupac shirt. And the funny thing is I comment, his mom sent a picture out of him. It's him, his mom, I think his stepdad, and then one of the Notre Dame coaches, and he has the Tupac shirt on. And so I retweeted it, and I was like, so obviously number one, Xavier's my number one safety on the board before this, but now that he's rocking a Tupac shirt, at his age, Tupac died when I was in high school.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, and I think I was a freshman in high school. I'm old, right? So for him to be rocking the Tupac shirt just really was okay, I like. And so I was like, he moved up on my board, and so his mom responded. She's like, Mama's doing something right. And I was like, well, Mama's definitely now the number one mama on my board. If you got your kid, if you're the reason your kid's rocking Tupac, then yes, we are good people. That's good parenting.
That's funny.
So,
that's
funny. But yeah, it was pretty cool to see. It was pretty cool to see.
Sydney
Back
Moore.
when rap was actually good.
Yeah, right.
I know I'm going to send some young people into a tizzy on that one, but I'm sorry. What I listened to in high school and college.
Board now. Thanks.
Yeah, what I listened to in high school and college, and I know I'm sounding like that old guy that get off my lawn guy, but I'm sorry. I've listened to modern rap, and I've tried. It's hot garbage.
Sydney Moore says, I've heard you guys use the phrase that coaches have to close on recruits to get them. What does closing process actually look like?
Great question, Sydney. And
really
it's different
question.
for every kid. And it's just about, okay, you've got here, you have to figure out kind of what's needed to seal the deal. Okay, so a kid is hesitant about, playing time. Okay, you gotta answer those questions. A kid is concerned about, well, it's far away from home. You've got to figure out ways to ease those concerns. You and this school are really close, and they're strong here, and you're strong there, but I'm really torn. Then you got to figure out how a way that you can counter where they're strong. Hey, you know what? Like, that's good for them, but let me tell you something. Let me have you talk to somebody. We've seen this before, where in the past, where Notre Dame was recruiting a kid and the academic piece was hurting them, meaning the kid wanted to major in something. This used to be a problem back in the day with engineering. It's not so much a problem anymore because Notre Dame has now programs in place. But it used to be where if a kid wanted to be an engineer, it was a little harder to deal with Notre Dame. So they'd have to get people involved from the academic side of things to show how that can still be a pathway. And so there may be some things like that at times that you have to answer. So it's about finding what the concerns are. It may not be the kid. It may be mom and dad. Mom and dad may be on board, but the kid isn't. And so there's all types of different ways, Sydney, but it's about you have to really know where you stand. And that's the important thing. Yeah. That's the thing I've liked, though, about the last couple of weekends is in the past, honestly, I'll be real with you. Okay. In the past, I honestly rarely talked to people at Notre Dame about how visits went because I knew what they were going to say. We're going to get every kid. If Notre Dame got the kids that they thought they were going to get after visits, they would have had the number one recruiting class in the country every year. But what I've liked about this staff, there's a lot more realistic nature. There's even some skepticism. Hey, I had one person I talked to who was like, we thought we did a great job, but it's not over yet. They haven't said yes yet, so it's not over yet. I'm like, I love that. Because that tells me, okay, you haven't said yes. So what do I got to do to let's get this engagement finalized, right? Right. And so there's a lot of, hey, we're not done yet. So what do we need to do to close the deal? And sometimes it's just it's as simple as, hey, look, go do your visits. Kids love that. Like, wow, like they're not trying to push me. They understand this is a big decision, and with this other. And so then the kid goes on a visit the next weekend, and that school's trying to push him to commit, and he's like, forget that. I'm going to Notre Dame, right? I mean, there's all types of things, but honestly, Sydney, it's just different with every kid. But if you're not tuned in on where you stand with a kid, if you're always thinking you're always number one, and then this other school sneaks up on you, like, I didn't even know they were in it. But I'm like, well, I told you they were in it. You know what I mean? You didn't want to listen to me. Right. That's not the case anymore. Like, I'll pass along nuggets to people in Notre Dame, and they're like, we kind of had a feeling. And I'm like, cool, good, great. So they're much more in tune to, hey, there's a lot of work that needs to go in. We got to really be locked in, which means they're talking to parents, which means they're talking to coaches. They're not just talking to the kids. And that's very, very important.
KMA Preston says, is Zach Rice still taking his visit this weekend? And does him taking it and not committing elsewhere mean we still have a chance? Or do you think we are effectively out of the picture?
Zach was never going to commit in June until he took all his visits. And I don't even then, I don't know if he's going to commit this summer. He's still planning on taking the visit this weekend, as far as I know. I don't think that's going to change. I don't think Notre Dame is going to be a factor here when it's all said and done. That would be one of the bigger surprises of the deal. But as I've said all along, you never know with the visits. But there's a lot more at play here. I don't think Notre Dame's a major player for him. Hopefully in a week from now we're talking a different story. But right now I don't see Notre Dame being a player. And Notre Dame knows that of his top five, they know that they're fifth. Yeah, they're aware of that. And I don't know if there's a whole lot they could have done that.
KMA comes back with what current Notre Dame commit do you think gets slept on the most?
I think there's a couple. I think Nolan Ziegler's my number one on that list. I think that kid's really good. And there's nobody that has him ranked in their top 250 at Rivals. He's not in the top 300 at ESPN. He's not in the top 247, top 250. It was Aiden Gabera, but now he's not being slept on anymore. But I'd probably say it's Nolan Ziegler. I think Jaden Mickey's underrated by some. Rivals doesn't have him in their top 250. If there are 250 better football players than Jaden Mickey, then this is one heck of a class. But those are probably – and I think Jadarian Price is a little bit slept on, but not by a ton. I mean, he's probably top 200 for me. So, to me, Jadarian's 160 to 200. Everybody has him from 215 to 250. So he's not being slept on a ton. I don't even know if that's just a slight disagreement. But I think Nolan Ziegler is a top 200 football player right now. I just do. And he's not ranked in anybody's top group. And I think that's the guy that I would probably say is the most across the board being slept on.
Brandon says, trying to figure out why or how KJ Winston is at the top of the safety board for Notre Dame staff, along with Nwankpa. They must see something that they really like, even with the limited game film and games played.
Okay, so there's nobody all along with Nwankpa. Okay,
right.
And I'm I've had a lot of conversations with people about this.
Yeah,
I'm talking about good sources. It's Nwankpa and everybody else. That doesn't mean there aren't good football players. It doesn't mean there aren't guys that Notre Dame really likes, but there's one safety at the top of their board, and that's Xavier Nwankpa. That's not really a debate. But at the same time, what this staff has done a really good job with in this cycle, with one exception, and they've already rectified it in 2023, and that's quarterback. And we've had some complaints about how they recruited the board in 2022. They're already doing a much better job in that 2023. But at every other position, the one thing I think this staff has done a great job of, even a receiver, where I'm frustrated with, but they have had an expanded board, and they are recruiting the entire board. And they're not being left with their pants down, so to speak, if they miss out on the top guy. It has happened in the past. And so, we may say, hey, you're disappointed if some people are going to be, if they get, the A.O. Minor kid and they get Nicholas Anderson or the Morning Walker, there's going to be people that are going to be disappointed in that class, and rightfully so. But in the past, they wouldn't have even got Anderson and A.O. Minor because they would have put all their emphasis on the other guys, and then they would have been left with like two guys that you're like, that kid can't play at Notre Dame, right? And so they've done a really good job of recruiting the board. And same thing at safety. And to the point where there are kids that people are projecting as Notre Dame loves that kid, and the kid thinks Notre Dame really likes him. But I'm like, I know where he really stands on their board. And, wow, they're doing a good job by convincing people that this kid is on the same level as Xavier Nwankpa. That's called good recruiting.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's actually called great recruiting.
It's making everybody feel like you're wanted.
Yes.
That's important.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's smart.
I agree with
now, with regards to KJ specifically, from what I'm told, I've had a couple conversations about this. They do like him, but they also are saying the same things that I'm saying. And because I asked this, I said, look, here's what I see. Am I right or am I wrong? And they're like, no, that's big, long kid, alley player, good athlete, just not a lot of film on him. So there you have look at times, especially now with some kids not playing COVID years or shortened COVID years or spring COVID years, which throws off your whole timing of your season and everything. Yeah. You have to project a little bit. So what are they saying in KJ Winston? Really good sized kid. He's every bit of 6'1.5", 6'2", good frame, good downhill speed, and he's a thumper. So there's some things they haven't seen on film. Can he cover? They don't know. But there's things that you see to say, hey, he's worth taking a shot on because there's some things we really like. And then you see how senior year projects. So those are the things I believe Notre Dame sees in him that make a lot of sense, even though we haven't seen a lot of film. And he's a kid that they're going to rely a little bit more on camp film from the different camps. Because, these schools will get film from these, so the Under Armour people, they send their camp film to coaches, which is smart, so they can evaluate these kids. You're going to rely a little bit on that more for a kid like KJ than you normally would, because you just don't have enough game film to go
volume of game film.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
Exactly.
Well, I wanted to throw this up here. Ladarius says, he goes, I love y'all Notre Dame fans. I really do. Y'all some cool people. I respect it. And Notre Dame is a beautiful school, and I respect Notre Dame.
Appreciate you coming by, Ladarius.
We love having other guys in here. We respect that.
Is he a Bama fan or a Clemson fan? Because the only people I've had to boot out of this chat, and we've only ever booted a couple people that are and it's Bama fans. Because
he said he was looking forward to watching the Clemson quarterback. No, it might have been Alabama. Who's the Bryce kid?
Bryce Young, yeah.
Is he at Alabama or Clemson?
Yeah, he's at Alabama.
Okay, so maybe he is an Alabama fan. So I apologize.
He'd be the first somewhat moderately respectful Alabama fan, because I've had to boot every other Alabama fan that's come in, just comes in and says some real ignorant stuff, and I'm like, see ya. But I get it. I mean, they can, but
if it's respectful, come on in, man. We love that. Yeah. Anthony, there was some talk back and forth about the Florida State game, who was going to win, etc. He says, I'm going to the Florida State game with a buddy who's an FSU booster. I'll give him heck, and I'll be decked out in a gap closer T-shirt.
That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about.
Had to put that up there.
I can't wait to be walking into games to see people rocking IB gear.
Absolutely.
I cannot wait for it.
Absolutely.
I cannot wait. That's going to be so awesome.
John Dalton, he says, what's the reality of Notre Dame landing enough key pieces to not only land a potential top 5 class, but close the gap on the field?
That's the key right there. That's it. That's a great question, John, because to me, I don't care about a top 5 class. Clemson's had 2 top 5 classes in the last 10 years, I believe, as far as composite top 5 classes. But what Clemson has done a great job of year after year after year is getting meeting your needs. And sometimes your need isn't a highly ranked player. Right. This is what I said about Donovan Heinisch. This is a great example. Are there better, more talented players on the board at defensive tackle than Donovan Heinisch? Absolutely. But Notre Dame is saying, yes, but we know that Donovan is going to bring other attributes that we need that aren't just about who's 6'5", who's 290, and who's those kind of things. And they're trying to build a roster that's got some upside, some higher floors. And what Clemson did is they understood you have to bring in some program guys. And this is what I think hurt Ohio State at the beginning of Urban Meyer's tenure, because he was just bringing in the top highest ranked kids you could get. You're seeing Ryan Day bring in a few more lower ranked kids that kind of fit a profile that you need on your depth chart. Not every kid can be a 5-star, because then you're going to have a bunch of kids transferring. I've only ever seen one program be able to pull that off, and that's Bama. But Bama's able to get away with it because they can just replace the guy the next year, the 5-star. Most teams can't do that. Okay, let's just be honest about it. Nor is that even necessarily a healthy way to go about it, especially if there's certain things Notre Dame can't do that other programs do. Okay, so when you look at it, it's about, okay, you have to be good at certain positions, and it has to be relative to who you are as a school, right? So Clemson has been able to win 2 titles with relatively average to above average offensive lines. Notre Dame will never win a national title with an average to above average offensive line. That's just not the way they play. Bama can't win a title with an average above average offensive line because of their style of play, because of how Notre Dame recruits and who they can recruit. So they can't get away with that. Ohio State could get away with that a little bit because of the type of system that they run, and they've recruited to that. So there's been some pretty good Ohio State teams that didn't necessarily have great offensive lines, but it didn't matter because they got rid of the ball so dang quick. You didn't have to have a great offensive line. You have to recruit to your strengths. So like when you look at when Notre Dame played Miami back in 1988, Miami had better athletes 1 to 15, but Notre Dame did 2 things that were keys to victory that day as far as just personnel. Number 1 is Notre Dame couldn't match them 1 to 10, but athletically they could match them 1 to 5. Right? You had Ricky Waters, Rocket, Todd Light, right? Now you get down to 8, 9, 10, that's fine. But what the other part of it is Notre Dame said, if you're going to beat Miami, you have to beat up Miami. And nobody else could do that because Miami was pretty good along the lines. But Notre Dame was one of the few programs that was better.
Yeah.
That's important for Notre Dame. And then I think the other part is you have to have playmakers, whether it's tight ends, whether it's receivers, whether it's running backs. That's an area where Notre Dame's got to get better. And, of course, I think you need a dynamic quarterback. It doesn't have to be dynamic, meaning a top 10 NFL draft pick, but a guy that can execute your offense flawlessly.
Yes.
And so while Clemson is winning with Trevor Lawrence, Bama's winning with not Tua Tagovailoa, right? Who was a 5-star, number 6 overall draft pick, Heisman Trophy, whatever, this, that, and the other. But it was Mac Jones that won a title, not Tua. Do you know how many titles Alabama has won with a 5-star recruit at quarterback?
Not many. 0, yeah, because they've had a number.
Tua's the only one that's ever started.
Yeah.
Right? They never won with Tua. The Jalen Hurts was not even a top 100 recruit. You had Greg McElroy, AJ McCarron were not top 100 recruits.
Yep.
Jacob Coker was not a top 100 recruit. Jalen Hurts was not a top 100 recruit. Definitely not a 5-star. And Mac Brown was ranked 399 coming out of high school.
Right.
So, but what they did is they executed. The quarterbacks ran those offenses flawlessly. And then they look different.
Correct.
I mean, the offense that Jacob Coker was executing is a whole lot different than
the one Mac Jones was operating.
There you go.
No doubt about that. Yeah.
Right.
Paul's jumping in. He says, Brian and Vince, any chance at all that Angeli throwing dimes to Kay Saunders at all these camps could get him to flip?
That's not happening.
8. I don't.
It's not happening. That's not happening.
Didn't think so.
And I'm okay if it doesn't. I have Xavier Bradshaw ranked ahead of Caden Saunders. And Caden Saunders is very good. It's just, plus he's not big enough for Notre Dame, right?
I'm an Alabama fan. Okay. So
he's the first decent Alabama fan I've met.
Absolutely. I just want to put that in there. Coleman says, Football 101 question. If Burnham fills out and play Mike, where does that leave Junior?
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's necessarily about Coleman filling out about Burnham filling out, because he could fill out and play Will. It's about the movement skills. Burnham's a much better athlete than Junior. So, but let's just say he does play Mike. I think, number one, you're going to have a rotation. Why can't Junior be Bo Bauer, right? I mean, if Josh Burnham is Drew White, why can't Junior be Bo Bauer? I mean, they're both going to play a ton. But as I said before, I think Junior's got a big body. I mean, he could end up being an edge player. He could be a Viper. He could maybe be his body's not a whole lot different looking at as a junior in high school than Justin Ademiola's was, right? So I do think he could be that kind of guy, and he's really strong and powerful too. And that's the other key. Yeah, it's one. You could be 250 and capable of playing on the edge, and you could be 250 and not capable of playing on the edge. Okay, it's about what kind of power, functional strength and power that do you have.
Let's see. And Mike says, Vincent Bryan, your thoughts on Preston Zinter? Seems
guys
like
just can't wait to move on to the 2023 class. I have only watched a very little of him. I watched him when he got offered. He seems to be a very athletic player, but I watched like maybe 2 minutes of highlights, and so I don't really have much of an opinion beyond that. There are just not a lot of 2023 guys that I have spent a ton of time watching. I said this last show.
Sure. Yeah.
If you guys, here's the deal. Here's what I'll ask you all to do. If you want to talk about a 2023 kid in a show, if you know you want to ask me about this, do me a favor. Shoot me an email or a DM. Say, hey, Coach, I'm going to ask you about this kid during the show, and then that can give me some time to check his film out.
Homework,
right?
Yeah, right.
Because I'm not trying to disrespect y'all and say, hey, I'm not answering your question. It's just that's not where my time is being spent right now with a lot of these 2023 kids. Now, there's certain
the 22 is pretty important right now.
Right. Like the reason I know about the tight ends is because once they got Holden Stace,
they're done in
2022, right? That's why I've spent a little bit more. I'm starting to spend more time on linebackers, right? Like I watched Trey Edwards the other day, some more of him. So that's a position where they're there yet. But like with receiver, and I know Preston Zinter, I believe, is being recruited to play linebacker, but there are certain positions where I'm just not concerned about 2023. I've looked at the quarterbacks because Notre Dame's done a quarterback since March. So if you want to talk about a 2023 kid or a few, no problem with it. But just understand, if you just ask me out of the blue, cold, I'm probably not going to have an answer. But if you send me an email or shoot me a DM before the show, especially if it's like more than like 10 minutes before the show, I'll gladly watch these kids and check them out so we can talk about it. I mean, again, this part of the show and the mailbag is driven by y'all, right? It's what you want to talk about. So when I say I'm not going to talk about 2023 kids, because I'm not going to talk about kids who I'm not familiar with.
Sure.
But if you want to talk about it, just let me know who you want to talk about, and I'll watch the film and we can dive into it. Okay? Is that fair? Because like I said, if y'all want to talk about 2023 kids, then hey, let's do it. But I'm just telling you where I'm at with the recruiting, with the recruiting analysis and stuff.
Brandon Plensner says, actually feeling better right now about Notre Dame landing Bruner over any of the other Wisconsin guys based on what I've read since his visit. Brian, thank you for making me feel better about Hinzman, even though he could be prolonging his commitment.
So I don't know what you've read. I haven't read what anybody else wrote, so I'm curious. But I think that's why I would say I'm not – like, here's the deal. I had somebody read and I don't know what Tom's interview was like, so this isn't a knock on Tom, right? I'm sure Tom did a great job. But somebody said, hey, I just read the 247 article with Hinzman, and it doesn't sound good. Like, what do you mean it does? I said, first of all, it doesn't sound like anything. It's a written article. Okay. It doesn't have any sound to it. You have no emotion, no body language, none of that, right? That's the concern. It's one of the drawbacks to the written word, right? Unless unless someone's an author that's able to use the things between quotes as sort of to build the emotion or whatever, you're not going to get that out of it. And plus, I believe that Tom is interviewing these kids after visits, so it's in his defense, it's kind of like, I got to quickly get this kid so then I can go over and talk to this kid. And so, those can be a little bit different environments. You don't have time to necessarily do what I did on the phone with Carson, which is I waited till he got home, talked to him then, and had a really long conversation with him in a really nice article. And it's a little better to kind of get some of the emotion and feeling out of it. But the point is, I just don't want to put a ton into sort of these types of articles as far as people saying, well, it doesn't sound good. And then, so, I'm trying to think of how to say this. More often than not, it's more of the way that it's being portrayed. You're just answering questions. Okay. Yes, 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 yes. And when you're doing these things post-visit, right after a visit, it can be difficult to follow up and dive into things. And so that's why I wouldn't put too much into with what I write, with what anybody writes, into too much that immediate gut reaction. Because sometimes you're going to get a feeling that things are better than they actually are once the kid gets home and the emotion wears off. And, like I said, there was a kid that visited last weekend that, sounded great, said all the right things. We had a great story on him. I know 247 from what I'm told, people text me stuff. Hey, it looks like they're really excited about this kid. And a week later, that kid's looking like he's going somewhere else. So just let these things play out. Don't put too much into ways. And some kids are better interviews. That's the other part of it.
Absolutely.
Right. Some kids are close, hold things close to the vest, especially if they're talking to someone they don't know, and so there's a lot that goes into it. So, and that's not at all a criticism of what anybody else is writing. It's just the nature of recruiting in general. And it's true of things that I may put out after a visit, right? That's kind of part of it.
Singer suggested 6 silent commitments. Are you hearing similar? I only threw that up here because he said similar, left it wide open.
Yeah.
That's the only reason I put that up.
Is he talking 22 and 23? There's context that I need. I didn't read what Mike said. I didn't read the context of it. I don't know if it's 1 class or 2 classes. 6 would be a little high for me if it's just 2022. I'm trying to think. 1, 3. If there's 6, okay. So now, so 2. You guys are like wanting me to do this math out loud, aren't you?
I'm just watching. I'm enjoying it personally.
I say at least 5.
Okay,
potentially 6, but the 6 would be someone that I'm hoping that it's not 6. Let's just say that. I'm hoping it's not 6. Because if it is 6, then it's somebody that I don't think we necessarily would. I personally would want in the class.
By the way, there's a bunch of Tupac stuff in here, which is awesome, and a lot of pro Tupac. So I figured you'd appreciate that.
So every pregame in high school and college, and even when I got into coaching, every pregame, I always listen to, back then we had Walkmans, you know what I mean?
Of course.
But I always had 2. There were 2 people you knew were going to be on. You were going to have Tupac and Wu-Tang were going to be on my warm up. And then the rest of it on my mixtapes would be a little different. And this was also back. I used to have mixtapes where you had to on VHS or not VHS but cassette, where you had to have the big thing and you had to hit play and hit record and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, but Tupac was always going to be on that pregame stuff, and then of course the Wu-Tang, and then I would mix it up, different things, Mobb Deep, whatever the case may be, but. Yeah, you were always gonna have Tupac and Wu-Tang on my pregame stuff. I never understood how dudes could listen to like country music before a game. I just dude, I want to go like line dancing. I don't want to go play a football game. Like I just never got into that.
Christopher Sally says, I believe Bradshaw is visiting this upcoming weekend. Have you heard if Notre Dame's view of him has changed, or is he still a Plan D type option?
As far as I know, he's still not a guy they're pushing for. Now I'm hoping that changes. The fact that they're now because originally 2 weeks ago. They were talking about bringing him in the fall. That's what he was being told. That's what our sources on his side of things were being told from Notre Dame. The fact that they're now bringing him in now, that's a positive sign.
Right.
But I think part of it's going to be the visit. I think one of the concerns I've been told Notre Dame has with Xavier is his size. If he shows up and he's 5'10", that's going to probably they're not. But if he's skinny but 6 foot, that could change some things a little bit.
Sure.
So in their defense, I just don't think that matters that much. I mean, the number
to me it doesn't matter at all.
Number 6 or overall draft pick in this past year's draft was 5'10", right? Jalen Waddle. But in their defense, that's what they like, big receivers. So
sure.
If they want to see what size he is, go for it. But I do think that's also part of the hesitation is does he show up at 5'10", 155, or does he show up at 6 foot 170 or 165? Those 2 differences could change some things.
Sure.
And we've seen that before. We've seen guys they really liked that showed up on campus and were like, yeah, he's not nearly as big as we thought he was going to be.
Right.
And you kind of have to move on because the kid doesn't fit the profile that you need and you think will project to be successful.
Jeff says, can't even begin to explain how good it feels to be really excited about the next 5 years. Thank you, Irish Breakdown, for your hard
You're
work.
welcome.
And thank you, Jeff, for being involved.
And Jeff, it seems like a new name that's commenting. So if it is your first time commenting or even listening, I appreciate that very, very much. Glad to have you on board.
Brent says, is it that Notre Dame might be recruiting the board too much? It seems like we start incredibly strong every year, then fade down the stretch. Is that a result of taking unnecessary commitments early and then missing on better guys that take their time with their commitments, guys we would have had legit chances of landing?
I think that used to be a much bigger problem than it has been in this class. And I'll say this, in this class, they did that at tight end and they rectified it. They fixed it. I mean, it said, look, we're going to honor your commitment. You can be in the class if you want, but we're going to still go get 2 more tight ends.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, that's what they did. And, but again, the thing about Amorian Walker, the difference that I have with Notre Dame is not about the recruiting strategy. They don't view him the way that I do.
Right.
And that's what you have to understand is they don't view Amorian as they view him as a project because he's so skinny and but they view him as a high ceiling guy. Like they view him as a guy that's going to be a big threat vertical weapon.
Mm-hmm.
They like him. They didn't take him to take an early spot. Okay. So it comes down to who's right. If they're right, then it's going to, and then we talked about this the other day. If Notre Dame's right about Amorian Walker, the conversation is going to go from what Brent's saying. You took him too early and he maybe filled a spot that maybe somebody better could have had. It's going to shift from, thank God they got on him before Alabama and LSU and Clemson did and Georgia did, right? So it's all about how you view a kid. They don't view him as just a guy to take to fill a spot.
Yeah.
There aren't a whole lot of guys. I can't name a guy in the class that they view that way. Now, in the past, they would convince themselves of that. But with Amorian, I mean, I actually get where they're coming from. I don't agree with it, but I understand it. It's not that I think they're convincing themselves. I think there's some other kids in this class at receiver that they're pushing for right now that I feel that way about. But at most other positions, I don't feel that way. And I think they've done a good job. What Brent's talking about to me has been a bigger issue in the past than it is right now.
I agree. Tyler says, with Estimate, Diggs, Price, and potentially Singleton, who would you say projects as the best pass catcher out of the backfield?
Estimate, Diggs, Price, and Singleton. Of that group, I would say Diggs. I think Diggs is the best pass catcher. Now, none of them are like Kyron in that they're going to line up in the slot and run a bunch of downfield routes. But Diggs is, to me, a lot, like I said, he's kind of a Tony Jones type, but more athletic, where he's a traditional running back, but he's a traditional running back to be really good in the pass game, in my opinion.
Robert asks, was Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence, or Mac Jones ever close to coming to Notre Dame? I don't even think Notre Dame recruited any of those guys, did they?
Well, because they had their quarterback in 2018. His name he's now at Boston College.
Yeah,
because 2 of those guys were in the same class.
Right.
I don't know about 18, 19, 20. Yeah, Mac Jones, I think, was in the 17 class, but Fields and Trevor Lawrence were in the 18 class. Notre Dame got Phil Dracovic early. Phil Dracovic at the time was considered a better prospect than Justin Fields. Justin Fields kind of blew up later in the deal. But, yeah, they had their guy. So, no, they never recruited Justin Fields because they signed their quarterback when he was a sophomore. And I still agree with that decision.
Shannon asks, over the last 5 to 10 years, can you name a recruit or 2 that Notre Dame landed, but you thought they had no shot in landing during their initial recruitment?
So, Vince, I'm going to ask you to move on past that question.
Okay, that's fair.
As I'm answering others,
you're going to be looking it up. I got you.
Yeah, I'm going to be looking at some of the classes, and because that's a good question. So, guys that they got that I didn't think that they were going to get. I'll say this: if they end up with Jalen Sneed, if they end up with him, he'd be that guy. Because I remember when they first offered him, I was like, yeah, it's a cool offer. Like I actually wrote about them offering him. And they offered like Sean Murphy, Harold Perkins. They offered Junior Tuihalamaka. And I'm like, man, they're going after some big fish. And I was like, they're not going to get this guy, but it's cool. They're at least trying, And then lo and behold, they're going to get him. But yeah. Go through the next one, and I'm going to try to see if I can come up with some names here of some guys, because there's definitely been some guys like that where you're like, no, you look and say, wow, I cannot believe that they got that guy.
A lot of comments about national championships and when Notre Dame's last one and et cetera. So that was
still Bama fans still in there arguing?
Oh, he's not arguing. He's asking some legit questions. I really dig it, actually.
Okay.
And Mike says, Coach constantly being a professional with that great poker face. He goes, reveal to us, please. Like he says, be patient, everyone. I thought that was good.
I'm sorry.
Chili
it can
says,
be hard sometimes.
Yeah, I know, right? Chili says, I'm from the Walkman era, too.
I remember walking around my neighborhood in high school, Virginia Beach, and I just had my Walkman on and just – and then you get the end of the tape and you have to like flip it over. And that. Just like listen to my music, just in my own world, man. Just thank God there wasn't a lot of traffic in my neighborhood. Otherwise, I might have got hit by a car or two. Because when I get the music on, man, I just kind of space out and be in my own world.
You were talking about heights of receivers. Big Jim jumps in. He says Joey Gethrall was like 4'10", 4'11". He wasn't
Jim,
quite
come
that
on,
short.
man. We don't need to exaggerate. He was 5'1" at least.
Seriously, how tall was he? About 5'7",
He was like 5'8".
5'8"?
Yeah, he was really
Yeah,
tiny. He
about
was like
my height.
5'7".
Yeah.
Mike Miller wasn't that much bigger than that either. Remember him? He was supposed to be the next
Yeah.
Rocket.
I do.
Yeah, he was that kind of guy.
KMA says, I wish we'd be more open to smaller wide receiver guys like Tutu Atwell, Devontae Smith, Rondell Moore have showed small wide receivers can have immense success.
I agree. And to me, it's not about smaller receivers. It's about recruiting. And we talk about, it's not about bigger. It's about recruiting diverse skill sets. And just the reality is they're not going to find a lot of big guys that do what Tutu Atwell did. And when they are, their names are like Randy Moss and you know what I mean? Like you just don't find it. And to me, it's about finding specific making sure that you've got multiple skill sets. Because what happens is if you only have one type of guy, you're going to play some teams, usually really good teams, that can kind of defend that one type of guy. And if you don't have counter weapons to that, then you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
And that's sort of been the issue for Notre Dame. Like when they played Clemson in 2018, Clemson had two big corners that were first and third round draft picks. So they were able to somewhat negate the size advantage that Notre Dame's receivers had on other people. I mean, Trayvon Mullen and AJ Terrell were both over 6'1". So, that's why I say it's about diversity. And so it's not being open to smaller guys. It's about being more willing to accept a smaller guy if he provides a trait that you currently don't have on your roster.
Doug has a really good question. He says, if Jarrett plays center this year, is Zeke Correll going to guard and Carson Hinzman to play center? The reason I put this up is because we're going to talk about the offensive line tomorrow. And there's going to be a lot of interesting pieces, I think, based on what you're hearing. So the Jarrett to center, Zeke Correll to guard, all of that conversation, we're going to have that tomorrow. So that was I put that up there because it's kind of a preview for what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah.
Zachary says Wu-Tang is for the children.
Ban him. Kick him out. Kick him out. Boot him. Boot him. Vince, and you're going to get booted if you ever put another thing up like that on the thing, okay? I can do solo shows, buddy. I'm just saying. Just saying. You ever put that kind of nonsense on in my channel again, boy? You're lucky I like you, Zachary.
Yeah, that's great.
You got my nephew's name, so I'm going to let you slide this once, but don't let that. You got to strike one, buddy. And I'm not. There's going to be no something like that. There is no strike two. It's
there's
just
no strike two.
Out. Out. No game over.
Two. Oh man. That's Jeff says Manti Te'o was a shocker. Yeah. When he committed to Notre Dame.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
going off
definitely
the
one.
Kind of
I'm trying to find
that was the one
guys.
that came. That's the one that came to my head first because I remember sitting in class teaching, and I'll put that in air quotes on signing day. Yeah. But I remember him committing. It was in the afternoon for us, obviously, because he was out in Hawaii. And I remember getting that text or I was watching it online. I forget exactly what it was, but I remember thinking, holy crap, they just got Manti Te'o. I remember that being a shocker to me.
I was legitimately like, at first I was like, I think I said this the other day, but I was waiting on him to like throw the hat down and pick up another one. You know, some kids will do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think that was a thing yet at the time, but like, that's kind of what I was waiting on. I was like, there's no way that they just got Manti, especially because when you think about it, they had just been garbage. And then when you hear about, remember, he visited for the Syracuse game. And he watched the second half from the locker room because he was too cold.
He went inside
because it was too cold. And you got students throwing snowballs at players, and you lost to a Syracuse team whose coach had been fired.
Right.
Greg Robinson had been fired already.
And he
was still
committed.
coaching the team.
Like that, just
right.
Yeah.
And he's not did he commit. He still signed. Like he had time to think about it.
Yeah.
And he still signed. And of course it worked out tremendously well for him because that was the end of the USC dynasty.
Right.
Was the year he was a senior. It was the end. And even the dynasty had already died, but the 2010 season is when it was finally killed. Like it was dying and they finally killed it. And it has not resurrected since then. But
Zachary had a great comment. He goes, "My work productivity screeches to a dead halt whenever these live shows happen."
Thanks, he's just making up for his Wu-Tang comment previously.
Yeah, I had to I'm trying to help him out here a little bit. That actually is about it at the moment. So
there aren't a lot of guys that Isaiah Foskey's one. Like, and I'm just about guys like, there's no way that guy's going to pick Notre Dame. With all these guys, I mean, I felt like Notre Dame had a shot with them. A lot of these guys that they got that were highly ranked players were Tavon Coney's a guy that I didn't think they have a shot with, just because that's not an area where Notre Dame normally recruits really well. Not really where you find a lot of pro Notre Dame players, I would say. Looking back to some of the past classes, a lot of these guys I think are guys that. But see, this comes down to the deal where take that one off if you want to put up the other question, Vince, so we can kind of address it. Greg Bryant is another one, and Torian Folston were two guys I didn't think Notre Dame had any shot with. But here's the deal, Vince. This is where I have a difference of opinion than a lot of people. I think Notre Dame is a heavyweight. I think they've always been a heavyweight recruiting staff or recruiting institution. It's whether or not you have a staff that's willing to go after those heavyweights.
Sure.
That's the difference. And the reality is that Notre Dame for a long time had far too many coaches that were just unwilling to fight those battles. So the kids you didn't think they had much of a shot with, they just never got into it with. But I also think part of that too is you also have to be smart about recruiting, saying, hey, if it is a guy you don't have much of a shot with, how much time do you really want to invest in that kid? And that's the other part of it too is so you have to strike that balance. And I think in the past, I think the Notre Dame staffs were too quick to say, no way, we don't have a shot there. So we're not going to fight the battle. Put it like this. For much of the last decade, Notre Dame would never have gotten to this far with Jalen Snead. They'd offered him and like, look, we don't have a shot. And the minute Clemson offers, we're not going to get him anyway. Is it really worth our time? No, let's just take Sebastian Cheeks. That's what would happen. And that wouldn't have been anything we would have crushed him for because Sebastian Cheeks is a pretty good football player.
Sure.
But that's exactly what would have happened in the past. And it would have, they would have missed out on a better player. This staff is like, well, okay, why not Sebastian Cheeks? Right? We're Notre Dame. And why not? And so, and you're going to miss on a lot of those guys. And so for example, you look at a guy like Kamari Rogers. Notre Dame did everything possible and just couldn't even get him on campus. It's going to happen. And honestly, when it comes to the elite players, you're going to miss on more guys than you get. But that's okay. That's fine. So did Lou Holtz. But you still go after all those top-level players. And I'm not talking about rankings. I'm talking about guys that have elite talent because you don't need to get 10 of them a year or 15 of them a year. You need to get like 5.
Right.
That's the key.
Yep.
So, there really haven't been a lot of guys to Shannon's comment. Like Foskey was one just because he wanted to play tight end. That wasn't really the position they were looking at him for. There just was a lot of things like that. Xavier Bradshaw just announced that he's going to be on campus Thursday. A buddy of mine just texted me. So Xavier Bradshaw says, very excited to announce and be blessed with my first official visit to the University of Notre Dame this Thursday. Okay. So looks like they may be getting him on a little bit early. So
that's good.
But that's to answer my question is, you could maybe ask Tom Loy that, and Tom's been covering Notre Dame recruiting for not quite as long as me, but a long time. You could ask Steve Wiltfong that because Steve Wiltfong's been covering recruiting. He actually started covering Notre Dame recruiting. You could have asked Lou Emoji back, prior to his tragic passing, and they would have had a lot of stories for you because I think sometimes people can look at what Notre Dame's ceiling is a little differently. I have always been a bit more optimistic on the side that I think Notre Dame can go toe-to-toe with the big boys more than they have. And every single coach they've ever signed that they've hired that is willing to battle has won a lot of those battles. So, like, you look at the 2018 recruiting class. Kevin Austin's not your typical Notre Dame recruit. You look at some of the guys. I mean, Derek Allen might have been one. The people are like, well, yeah, he's a top. Remember, Derek Allen's like a top 50 recruit from Georgia when Notre Dame got on him. DB at that. So there are a lot of those guys. Like if Kyle Hamilton was ranked early, what he ended up being, there are a lot of people say, I don't know if they can get that guy. But so to me, but Mike Elko was not afraid of anybody as a recruiter at Notre Dame. He went after those top guys and got them. Marcus Freeman's that way. Chip Long's that way. I mean, who would have thought that Notre Dame, could have been able to get guys like Chris Tyree and Jordan Johnson in the same class? Yeah. Those are the kind of guys Notre Dame doesn't normally get, right? Virginia kids, Southern kids, Penn State wanted them out. I mean, look, they beat Alabama and Oklahoma for a running back a couple years ago. Chris Tyree.
Right? I remember when we were sitting at one of the spring practices, we were up on the balcony, and you pointed out Chris Tyree and his mom walking around, and you're like, this is a dude. Notre Dame needs to get this kid. Yeah. We had a long conversation about it, and I was thinking to myself, it's never going to happen.
Right, because I told you the schools that he was looking at, right? I mean, that was the deal. But Chip Long and Lance Taylor did not have that same mentality. Yeah. They did not say, well, look, hey, Alabama wants more. I mean, we don't get kids like that. But they got to know Chris. They realized that Chris is a Notre Dame kind of kid. And they fought hard to get him. Because you got to fight hard to get those guys. Jordan Johnson's another example. I know it didn't work out for him, but as a recruit, he was a big-time recruit, right?
Absolutely.
Not your normal St. Louis kid that you just normally don't get. And so when you've had coaches that Harry Heastand, I mean, a lot of people say, what are you wasting your time on Eichenberg and Kramer for? I mean, they're going to go play for Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer's personally recruiting both of those kids. Well, Harry's like, I don't give a crap. I'm Harry Heastand. I'm in Notre Dame. I don't care who's recruiting them. And he went and got them, right? Went into LSU's backyard and got Jerry Tillery because he didn't care. Because a lot of people forget is Harry Heastand recruited Jerry Tillery. Because up until
he was an offensive
right before
line
signing, he was going to be an offensive lineman.
Yeah.
You know, and so we often forget that was another first-round pick that Harry Heastand recruited.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Good point.
You know, so that's what I felt is every Notre Dame coach has been willing to battle for the best players. Mike Denbrock was this way. They're hey, I don't care who you's recruiting them. We're Notre Dame. They're able to get those kids. And that's what I'm excited for because I think Tommy Rees is that kind of recruit. Now, he's still young, he's still learning his pitch, but like I don't think Tommy's just like he's kind of like that young guy. And I mean this in it's that young guy ignorance, right? And what I mean by that is I'm ignorant to the history of why coaches have been not doing this. So it's like all I know is that we've been in the playoff the last 3 years, and I love Notre Dame. I went to Notre Dame. Why wouldn't a 5-star want to go to Notre Dame, right? So he's ignorant to all the talking points that have been accepted from Notre Dame fans for 30 years. And so that's what I mean. It's a good thing. It's like he just ignores it. Okay, I want Nicholas Singleton. I don't care if Ohio State, Penn State, and Alabama want him. I want him, right? So let's go get him.
Yeah.
You know, Lance Taylor's kind of got that swagger to him a little bit. You know, Marcus Freeman definitely does. Mike Mickens does. Mike Elson does. And that's come in time with Mike Elson, you know, because that was that shift from Cincinnati to Notre Dame. But, I mean, year two, they've got Aaron Lynch. They got Ishaq Williams. They got Stephon Tuitt, right? I mean, so they've been able to do that. But I'd say Stephon Tuitt might have been one that I'd go back and look, and I was like, at first I didn't think they had a shot with Stephon Tuitt. That's probably, I'd go back that far. That's probably one. That I say a big time kid from Georgia. I don't know about that. So, yeah.
I got one more comment I'm going to throw up, and then we're going to wrap this thing up, Brian. Zachary says, ha, you misunderstood me, Coach D. The Wu-Tang is for children line was from the late, great ODB himself when he interrupted the Grammy Awards.
Wu-Tang is for the children.
For the children.
Okay. So I thought he said Wu-Tang is for children.
Yeah, okay.
Isn't that what he said?
I don't
in the first one? You'll find it here. Because if you're saying that, okay, see, I misread it. He did say it's for the children. So, yes.
Okay.
You're correct, Zachary. See, this is why I'm glad I didn't boot you initially. I didn't go off of emotion, right? I stuck with it. I gave you a chance. You've rectified it and come to find out the error was on me.
Oh, that's great.
Yes, Wu-Tang is for the children. ODB. Was this before he became like he changed his name? What was like Dirt McGirt or something like that? I mean, that guy was – you know, it's like Rick James said in the old Chappelle skit, you know, cocaine is a powerful drug. You know what I mean? Like it'll mess with you, man. Make you change your name from one funky name to another funky name. But yeah, no, Wu-Tang was the deal for me. You know, I didn't get into their solo careers as much. Like I like probably Jizza was the only one that I really liked his solo stuff. Actually, because he was never like one of the top guys with Wu-Tang when they were a group. He'd have some, but like it was Method Man, you know, Ghostface, ODB, you know, RZA obviously is the producer for a lot of it. But I thought Jizza's stuff was probably the best solo stuff that they had. I'm not a huge Ghostface, his solo stuff. Method Man's stuff was fun for parties, right? Like his solo stuff was like cool to have at a party. But it wasn't like it wasn't as original, like it wasn't like kind of to the heart of what Wu-Tang was, especially like if you're a protect your neck person like I was. Like their first album was their best album, you know. Like Reunited was good, but like there was a lot of commercial stuff in there too. But the first album was that was legit. That was legit. So anyway, that's my deal. Let's see. KMA Preston has a question. I think we'll ask this one and we'll wrap it up.
All right. It says, would you say Lance Taylor is the best position coach on offense when it comes to recruiting?
I think it's him and Reese are right now probably the two best, just from a work ethic standpoint, from a grinding standpoint. But I think Lance still has a little bit to prove. But I think this Nicholas Singleton thing is going to be a big feather in his cap, because remember, he almost crashed and burned at recruiting running backs last year because they put all their eggs in the Will Shipley basket. Didn't go after like Travion Henderson, some other guys. And then when they lost Shipley, it was like starting over from scratch. Then they got Logan Diggs, but he didn't recruit Logan Diggs. Logan Diggs, when he talked about committing to Notre Dame, I remember interviewing him. He talked about Terry Joseph and Tommy Rees as being the drivers of his recruitment. It wasn't Lance Taylor. But then Coach Taylor was part of convincing him to stay at Notre Dame when LSU came calling. Coach Taylor obviously went and got Audric Estime. Coach Taylor was a factor in Jadarian Price. And then, of course, he's bounced back. And that's the thing is, like, what we said at the time when they lost Shipley is, okay, this is a big loss. He needs to be crushed for this because the strategy was bad. But at the end of the day, what matters is who you get. How do you what's the end game? And the end game was really good. It's a really good two-man group. And so now it's about, okay, what have you done since then? And since then, he's done a really good job. And that's part of learning where you're at. You know what I mean? And so I think Coach Taylor's done a good job, but I think it's also a situation where, I think Tommy Rees has had a big role in some of those running backs too. And that's the thing I'm learning, and that's important. It's not just Tommy Rees recruiting quarterbacks, but you go read interviews of when Audric Estime committed. Go read interviews when Logan Diggs recruited. Go read things that these guys are. It's Tommy Rees has got his hands in all this.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's important. And that's something that that was one of the big question marks when he got hired is how's he going to be as a recruiter? Well, now he's got a year of coaching under his belt, and he's got, hey, look, my 1 year as a coach, we went to the playoff. Now, most of these kids aren't going to know that your offense was kind of mediocre. They're just going to say playoff 10, and if anything, these kids that weren't necessarily already high on Notre Dame last year, the only game most of these kids probably watched was the Clemson regular season game when the offense, had some big plays. So I think he's done a really good job. So I think those two guys to me are the dynamic ones. And if Coach Alexander can step up to the plate and Coach McNulty can, he's got some good players, but is he going to get the best players? Like, is he going to go after the Deuce Robinsons and the Jackson Howards? That remains to be seen. And then Coach Quinn has a chance to be that kind of guy if he can finish, but he's got to finish. He's got to close. And that's the big thing for me is he's got to close in this 2022 class. It's imperative for him to do that. And if he can, now all of a sudden you start to say, okay, I'm starting to feel a little bit better about this recruiting operation in Notre Dame on offense because we're confident about defense, but now it's about the offense stepping up. That's going to be the big part of this. So.
All right, Brian. Well, I think that's going to do it for this edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. Make sure you hit that like button, you subscribe, all of the fun stuff that you do either on the YouTube channel.
The notification bell,
and
if you're listening via podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating. Appreciate that. It's one of those things you can do to help us out to get our channel. The higher our ratings, the higher our overall rating, the more it gets spread around, the more it shows up on people's searches. So certainly. And if you have Notre Dame friends and family that are that don't listen to the show, let them know. Let them know. And yes, Zachary, you always have to be patient, man. The way to practice your patience. So absolutely. Yep. So, hey, everybody, thanks for being on the show today. Vince, thanks for hosting this with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really, really appreciate it. It was a fun show. And like I said, look, this is the second successful weekend in a row. Now it's about closing, right? Notre Dame's got to close on these guys. And I think they're in a good place to really finish out strong. But what their batting average is from here on out is going to determine whether this is a really good top 10 class that's in the competition for one of the 2 or 3 best of the BK era, or if this goes down as absolutely the best class. So,
no doubt. All right. We will talk to you tomorrow when we are going to break down the offensive line. So make sure you stay tuned.